Yo, what's up everyone? It's Horcrux Harry, and today we're checking out What If Hermione and Daphne Saved Harry from Privet Drive Age 8 and Ancient Magic Bonded Them. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The Cupboard and the Current. The thing about Privet Drive was that it was designed to make you stop noticing things. Every hedge was the same height. Every car was washed on the same day. Every lawn was green in exactly the way a lawn was supposed to be green, and if yours wasn't, Mrs. Number 7 would leave a passive-aggressive note in your postbox by Tuesday. The whole street operated on a kind of collective agreement that nothing unusual would happen here, that nothing unusual could happen here, and that anyone who suggested otherwise was either drunk or from London. So when a girl with a wild cloud of brown hair marched down the pavement at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning in July, a library book tucked under one arm and an expression like she'd already solved the problem nobody else had spotted yet, the neighbors who noticed her did what Privet Drive neighbors always did. They stopped noticing her. Hermione Granger was 8 years old, and she had walked 4 miles from the Granger family dentistry practice on the high street because something had told her to. Not a voice. Not a dream. Something more like a pressure behind her sternum, a pull like a fishhook through the middle of her chest, gentle but absolutely unyielding. She'd been sitting in the waiting room reading A Brief History of Time. Her father had given it to her as a joke and then been shocked when she'd actually read it, and the pull had started, and she'd put the book down, told the receptionist she was popping out for some air, and walked. She hadn't known she was going to Privet Drive. She hadn't known she was going anywhere specific. She'd simply followed the pull and ended up here, standing in front of number 4 with its identical privet hedge and its spotless windows and its front door painted a shade of green that whispered respectable in a way that made Hermione vaguely suspicious. She stood on the pavement and looked at the house. The pull was coming from inside. "Right," she said to no one. "Okay." She was already walking toward the front door when she nearly collided with the other girl. The other girl was about her age, with dark hair pulled into a neat plait, pale skin, and gray eyes that were currently fixed on number 4 with the focused expression of someone calculating distance and wind resistance. She was wearing a blue dress that was clearly expensive in the quiet, understated way that very good things sometimes were, and she held herself like someone who had been taught, from a very early age, exactly how much space she was permitted to take up. They both stopped. They stared at each other. "You felt it too," Hermione said. It wasn't a question. The other girl's eyes moved to her face, assessing and careful. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I live about 20 minutes from here. I told my governess I was visiting a friend. Do you have friends on this street?" "No." "Right." Hermione looked back at the house. "Neither do I. But something in there needs us," the other girl said quietly. Then she seemed to catch herself, like she'd said something more personal than intended. "I mean, there's something in there that requires investigation." Hermione decided she liked this girl, almost immediately, for reasons she couldn't articulate beyond the fact that the girl had felt the exact same pull and had followed it, and hadn't tried to pretend otherwise. "Hermione Granger," she said, and stuck out her hand. The other girl looked at the hand, then shook it with the precise, practiced grip of someone who had been taught to shake hands properly. "Daphne Greengrass. Do you have a plan?" "I was considering the front door." "That seems right." Hermione agreed, and they walked up the front path side by side. Daphne knocked. Hermione stood slightly to her left and watched the windows with the air of someone cataloging information. The woman who opened the door was thin in a way that had nothing to do with her body type and everything to do with how tightly she seemed to be holding herself together. Her neck was very long and her eyes were very small, and they fixed on the two girls with an expression that was somehow simultaneously suspicious and dismissive. "Yes?" said Petunia Dursley. "Good morning," Daphne said with the precise, pleasant smile of a girl who had spent her entire life in rooms full of adults who needed managing. "We're so sorry to bother you. We're looking for Harry Potter. We believe he lives here?" Something happened to Petunia Dursley's face. Several things happened to it, actually, in rapid succession: surprise, then fear, then something that went very hard and flat. "There's no one by that name here," she said, and started to close the door. Hermione put her hand on the door. She didn't push it. She just put her hand there, and something, either she nor Daphne could have explained what, exactly, made Petunia Dursley's hand stop moving. "We know he's here," Hermione said. Her voice was very calm. She wasn't angry yet. She was gathering information. "We just want to make sure he's all right." "I don't know what you think, you, Mrs. Dursley," Daphne said, still perfectly pleasant, still smiling. "We're not here to cause any trouble. But we will stand on this pavement for as long as it takes, and we will knock on this door every hour, and I should mention that my mother is very well acquainted with several people in local government." This last part was probably true in ways Petunia Dursley couldn't have imagined. The door didn't close. But it didn't open any wider either. Then the pull hit Hermione like a wave, sudden and urgent and not at all subtle anymore, and she turned her head without meaning to and looked at the door under the stairs. It was a cupboard door. Small. With a latch on the outside. An exterior latch, meaning it was designed to be opened from the outside and locked from the inside. No. The other way around. Locked from the outside. Something went cold in Hermione's chest. She looked at Petunia Dursley. She looked at the cupboard door. She looked at the latch, which was engaged, meaning it was locked right now, in the middle of the morning, with no reason for a cupboard to be locked in the middle of the morning unless something inside the cupboard didn't want, unless something inside was being. Daphne had seen it too. Hermione could tell by the way the pleasant smile had gone very still on her face, the way her gray eyes had gone very flat and very cold. "May we come in?" Hermione said. "Absolutely not," Petunia snapped. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain," Daphne said softly, "why there's a latch on the outside of your cupboard door." Petunia's face went through another rapid sequence of expressions. She settled, finally, on offense. "I don't have to explain anything to a pair of little—" Hermione had already stepped past her. She didn't push. She didn't shove. She simply stepped through the gap in the doorway as though the door wasn't partly closed, as though Petunia's arm wasn't in the way, and there was a moment, a fraction of a second, where the air around her did something that none of them were old enough to have a name for yet. Petunia Dursley took a step back without meaning to. Daphne followed Hermione inside, and the door swung to behind them. The house smelled like cleaning products, and something fried and a very faint undercurrent that Hermione's brain filed away and refused to think about directly. She walked to the cupboard. The pull was a roar now, a current running straight through her and out through her fingertips, and she lifted the latch and opened the door, and he was sitting in the corner of the cupboard with his knees pulled to his chest and a drawing in his lap. He was small, smaller than she'd expected, smaller than he should have been at 8 years old, and he was wearing clothes so large they seemed to be wearing him. His hair was a dark, violent mess, and his eyes, when he looked up, were green. A very specific, very clear green. The kind of green you didn't forget. He was looking at them with an expression that was careful in the way a person's expression goes careful when they've learned that hope is expensive. "Hi," Hermione said. Her voice came out softer than she'd intended. He looked at her. Then at Daphne. Then back at Hermione. "You're not Dudley's friends," he said. "No," Hermione agreed. "We're your friends. You don't know me. We know your name. We know you're in there." Hermione nodded at the cupboard. "We know the door was latched from the outside." He processed this. He didn't look shocked that she knew. He looked the way someone looks when they've stopped being surprised that the bad thing is the bad thing. "I'm not supposed to talk to people," he said. "I know," Hermione said. "But we came anyway." There was a sound behind them. Petunia Dursley, hovering in the hallway, making small sounds of protest that weren't quite forming into actual words, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. Daphne had positioned herself between the cupboard and Petunia with no particular fuss, just stood there in the hallway in her nice blue dress with her gray eyes and her stillness, and there was something about the way she stood that made Petunia Dursley stay exactly where she was. "Harry," Daphne said, not looking away from Petunia. "Do you want to come out?" A pause. "I'll get in trouble." "You won't," Daphne said. "I promise." Another pause, longer this time, the kind of pause that contains a whole history of broken promises and the difficult calculation of whether this one might be different. Then the boy unfolded himself from the cupboard with the careful, practiced movements of someone who had spent a great deal of time in very small spaces, and stood, and he was shorter than both of them, and Hermione noticed the way he held his left arm slightly close to his body, like it had been hurt recently, and the cold thing in her chest went a few degrees colder. "Harry," she said, keeping her voice normal because she could hear that if she didn't it would shake. "Are you hurt?" He looked at his arm. "It's fine," he said, in the tone of someone who has said those exact 2 words so many times that they've stopped meaning anything at all. "That's not what I asked?" He looked at her for a long moment, and in that look was about 8 years of a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who either didn't see you or actively chose not to. Then he said, quietly and precisely, "Yes." What happened next was not entirely under anyone's control. Hermione reached out and took Harry's hand, the right one, the one he wasn't holding close to his body, and when she touched him, the world, later, she would try to explain it to people who hadn't been there and find she couldn't quite do it. It was like a key turning in a lock. A circuit completing. A chord resolving. A word you'd been trying to remember suddenly arriving on your tongue, whole and perfect and exactly right. It was the pull that had dragged her 4 miles down a road she never walked before. It was that, but from everywhere at once, a rush of something warm and ancient and enormous that had no interest in being subtle about itself. Light came out of the walls. That was the only accurate description. Gold and white light came out of the walls of the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, Petunia Dursley's pristine, respectable hallway, and it moved like water and it moved like sound and it wrapped around all 3 of them, Harry with Hermione's hand in his, Daphne 3 feet away who spun around with her eyes going wide, and then Daphne was crossing the distance without seeming to walk it, and her hand found Harry's other hand. And Hermione felt it happen through whatever had just connected them. Felt Daphne as a presence, sharp and precise and fierce in a way her composure never showed, felt Harry as something open and exposed and so stupidly, desperately relieved to be touched gently, the light contracted. It pulled tight around the 3 of them, a warm, pressing embrace, and then it sank into them, and Hermione had one wild half-second where she thought she understood everything that had ever happened and everything that was going to happen, and then it was done. And the hallway was just a hallway again, and the 3 of them were standing there in a line. Harry was staring at his hands. The light was gone, but something wasn't, some residual warmth sitting in the skin of Hermione's palm where it pressed against his. "What was that?" Harry whispered. "Something old," Daphne said. She sounded slightly unsteady for the first time. Her composure had developed a crack. "Something very old." Hermione, because she was Hermione, was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She was thinking about the books she'd read, fairy tales and mythology, and a science book her father had given her where the author described the elegant precision with which large and complex systems could arise from simple initial conditions, and she was thinking that what had just happened had the feeling of a simple initial condition, the kind that led to very large and complex systems indeed. She was also thinking that she could feel Daphne's heartbeat. Not literally, but nearly. A sense of her, a peripheral awareness that sat at the edge of consciousness, like knowing someone else is in the room even when your eyes are closed. Daphne and Harry, both of them, presences at the edge of her mind like windows into adjacent rooms. Daphne met her eyes. "You feel it too?" she said. Again, not a question. "Yes," Hermione said. "What's happening?" Harry said. He wasn't panicking. He was very carefully not panicking, in the way of someone who has learned that panicking doesn't help. What's happening?" "We're connected," Daphne said simply. The three of us. I think we were always supposed to be. And something very powerful just made it official. Harry looked at her. That sounds mad. Yes, Daphne agreed. It does. Are you witches? A pause. Then Daphne said, with almost perfect composure. Yes, actually. And I think you might be a wizard. Harry Potter looked at the two girls he had known for approximately 7 minutes, in the hallway of his aunt's house, with the warm sense memory of ancient lights still sitting in his skin. He looked at the cupboard behind them. He looked at the latch on the outside of the door. Okay, he said. Can I leave now? Petunia Dursley had not moved from her spot at the end of the hallway. She was standing there with her long neck and her small eyes, and she was doing the thing people do when they've witnessed something they have no framework for, trying to decide whether to pretend it hadn't happened. Daphne walked up to her. She didn't walk in a threatening way. She walked in the calm, measured way she always walked, and she stopped 2 feet from Petunia and looked up at her. Daphne was small, 8 years old, had to look up, and said, Harry's going to come with us now. You can't, he'll need his things, Daphne said. Whatever he has that belongs to him. He doesn't have. Petunia stopped. Something shifted in her face, something that might have been shame if there'd been more soil in it. There's a box. In the cupboard. With some things from his parents. That box, Daphne said pleasantly. And anything else of his. Please. Hermione, behind her, had crouched down to Harry's level. Your arm, she said quietly. Can I see it? He hesitated. Then he pushed up the sleeve of the enormous jumper he was wearing, July, and he was wearing a jumper, which told Hermione several things she tucked away, and his forearm had a bruise on it that was purple-yellow and 3 days old at least, shaped like a grip. Hermione looked at it for a moment. Then she pulled the sleeve back down gently, carefully. We're going to fix that, she said. Not the bruise. I mean, the situation. You can't fix, they're my family, Harry said, with no particular emotion in it. Dumbledore said I have to stay with them. There are protections. Hermione frowned. Who's Dumbledore? I don't know, exactly. Aunt Petunia says his name sometimes when she wants to explain why I can't go somewhere. He said it very matter-of-factly, like it was just the geography of his life. Hermione stored Dumbledore in the part of her mind where she kept things to research urgently. We'll deal with that, she said. You're 8. I'm aware, Hermione said crisply. It doesn't seem to be stopping us so far. Harry looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, just barely, a fractional upward twitch, the ghost of something that with enough time and care and food might develop into an actual smile. You're kind of strange, he said. Thank you, Hermione said. Petunia brought the box. It was small, a shoebox, really, and she held it out without meeting Harry's eyes, and he took it with a carefulness that broke Hermione's heart a little, like it was the most precious thing he'd ever been allowed to hold. There wasn't much else. A second pair of trousers that were his actual size, and a small stuffed dog missing one ear that he picked up from the shelf inside the cupboard and then immediately seemed to think better of carrying. Bring it, Daphne said quietly, not looking at him. He brought it. The 3 of them walked out the front door of number 4, Privet Drive, on a Tuesday morning in July, into brilliant summer sunshine, and Petunia Dursley stood in the doorway and didn't call out, didn't call the police, didn't do anything at all, because there was something in the set of those 3 small spines that made stopping them feel inadvisable. Harry stopped at the garden gate and looked back at the house. Hermione expected something, grief maybe, or relief, or the complicated mixture of the two. But his face was just very still, taking a very clear photograph, and then he turned away and that was that. Where are we going? He said. My house, Daphne said. It's about 20 minutes' walk. Your parents will be fine with me? My mother is currently away at a conference in Edinburgh, Daphne said. My father trusts my judgment. And my governess, Mrs. Prentice, is very good at asking the right questions, which means she's also very good at not asking them. That's quite a lot of trust for an 8-year-old. I'm a very reliable 8-year-old. She paused. You're not the only one who's had unusual things happen around them. Harry looked at her. Then at Hermione. Things happen around you too? I made a book fly once, Hermione said. At school. A boy was trying to take it. It sort of flew at his head. Did it hurt him? He had to go home early, Hermione said, with no particular regret. Harry was quiet for a moment. I made the glass disappear at the zoo, he said. There was a boa constrictor. I wanted it to be free and then, the glass wasn't there anymore. Did the snake leave? Hermione asked. Yes, it said. He stopped. It talked to me. But that sounds completely plausible, Daphne said firmly. Keep walking. The Greengrass house was not, technically, in Little Whinging. It occupied the kind of position that houses like it often occupy, close to enough people to be convenient, far enough from them to be private, with a drive long enough to discourage anyone who hadn't been specifically invited. It was old stone and ivy and 3 stories of windows, and it sat in grounds that were extensive without being showy about it, and the whole thing exhaled the quiet certainty of people who had been comfortable for a very long time. Harry stopped at the gate. You live here? Yes, Daphne said. Right. He looked at the house, then at his shoebox, then at his 2 large trousers. Right. Hermione noticed the look on his face, the particular kind of self-consciousness that people develop when they've been told often enough that they take up too much space, or not enough, or the wrong kind. She fell into step beside him without saying anything about it, just close enough that their arms nearly touched, and after a moment she felt through whatever the bond was. She was already thinking of it as the bond, capital B, because it needed a name, a small settling in Harry. Not fixed. Just slightly less alone. Mrs. Prentice, the governess, was a compact Scottish woman in her 50s who had been with the Greengrass family for 11 years and had survived in that role by understanding exactly 2 things: what her employer's family genuinely needed, and when not to ask about it. She opened the door, looked at the 3 children, Daphne with her neat plait now slightly less neat, the bushy-haired girl, and the small boy with the bruised arm and the shoebox and the one-eared stuffed dog, and she said, I'll put the kettle on and make up the blue room. That was all. Harry looked after her with something naked in his face that he covered over quickly. Hermione suspected the something was the look of a child who had not been offered tea as a default assumption before. They sat in the kitchen, which was large and flagstoned and smelled of bread, and Daphne served tea with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times, and they sat around the table, and for a moment none of them said anything because there was a lot to say and no obvious starting point. Harry looked at his hands on the table. The light, he said. When you held my hands? What was that? Daphne wrapped both hands around her teacup. My mother told me about something, she said carefully. A kind of magic. Old magic. Not the kind they teach at school, not spells and wand movements. The kind that was here before all of that. She paused. She said it responded to people. That it didn't care about blood or heritage or any of the things people argue about. That it made its own choices. It chose us, Hermione said. It did. Harry was still looking at his hands. What does that mean, exactly? For us? Daphne and Hermione looked at each other across the table. The bond between them was less than 2 hours old, and already Hermione could feel that Daphne was choosing her words very deliberately, which meant the actual answer was something large and complicated. We're connected, Daphne said. Our magic is connected. I think it means we'll always know where each other are. And I think it means that when we're together we're more, Hermione said. Daphne nodded. More. Harry thought about this. Hermione watched him think about it, watched the careful way he assembled the information, the particular stillness of someone who has learned to be quiet and observant because being loud and obvious was never safe. He was clever, she realized. He was very, very clever, under all the layers of being diminished. "Who's Dumbledore?" he said at last. Daphne set down her teacup. "Albus Dumbledore," she said, "is the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He's considered the greatest wizard of his age, and he's probably the most powerful person in our world." She hesitated. "He's also the one who placed you with the Dursleys." Harry's face did something complicated. He knew. He knew. And he did it anyway. "He had reasons," Daphne said carefully. "I don't know all of them. I don't think anyone does except him. My father talks about Dumbledore sometimes. He says he respects him but doesn't entirely trust him. That he sees people as pieces sometimes, rather than people." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "When will he find out I'm gone?" "I don't know," Daphne admitted. "He'll come here. Probably. And when he does..." Daphne looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Daphne. Something passed between them through the bond, not words, not quite, but a feeling, an alignment, a mutual recognition that they were thinking the same thing. "When he comes," Hermione said, "we'll be ready." Harry looked at the two of them. This girl from a magical family who had followed a pull across 20 minutes of Surrey, this girl from a family of dentists who had walked 4 miles on a Tuesday because something wouldn't let her not, both of them sitting there at the kitchen table with their tea going slightly cold and their expressions absolutely decided, and something in his face did, finally, the thing Hermione had been waiting to see. He smiled. It was small and a bit lopsided, and it had clearly not had very much practice. But it was real, and it changed his whole face, and Hermione felt it through the bond like a door opening into sunlight. "Okay," Harry Potter said. "Tell me everything about the wizarding world. Everything. Start from the beginning." Daphne picked up her teacup. "It's going to take a while. We have time." "Yes," Hermione agreed, and she was already reaching for the book she'd carried 4 miles without noticing she was carrying it. "We do." The letter arrived at sunset. It came through the kitchen window, not by post, but carried by a large, tawny owl that landed on the windowsill and extended its leg with the grave dignity of an animal performing an important function. Harry, who had spent the last 8 hours eating actual meals at regular intervals and absorbing 6 years of wizarding world history from Daphne's patient explanations and Hermione's ruthless follow-up questions, watched the owl arrive with his head slightly tilted. "Should I?" he started. "Yes," Daphne said. She was at the window already, relieving the owl of its letter, which it surrendered without fanfare. The letter was addressed in green ink. "Mr. H. Potter, The Kitchen, Greengrass House, Surrey." Hermione stared at it. "It knows exactly where we are. Tracking charm on Harry," Daphne said. "Standard for wizarding minors. It's how the Ministry monitors underage magic use. Dumbledore would have access to the same monitoring." Harry looked at the letter. "It knows I'm here," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "He knows you're here," Daphne corrected. "The address update on the letter, it would have been tracking you. When you left Privet Drive, the letter found you." "Open it," Hermione said. Daphne slit the envelope with the precise movement of someone who had opened correspondence under observation before. She read it, and her face didn't do much. It was quite a controlled face, but something around her eyes shifted. "What does it say?" Harry said. She handed it to him without comment. He read it. Hermione leaned over his shoulder. It was short, and it was measured, and it was kind, even, in the way of someone who genuinely believed what they were writing. It spoke of concern, and protective enchantments, and the importance of the blood wards at the Dursley home. It spoke of Harry's safety, and the necessity of certain sacrifices, and the fact that it would be best for everyone, for Harry most of all, if he returned to his aunt and uncle's house tonight. It was signed with a flourish, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and put it on the table, and his face was very still and very clear. "No," he said. Hermione looked at him. He was 8 years old. He'd had tea and bread and a proper meal and one conversation about the magical world, and he'd been out of that cupboard for less than 10 hours. And he said no with the absolute finality of someone who had waited, considered it, and landed on the only answer that made any sense. "My father will handle the legal aspect," Daphne said. She'd already pulled paper from a kitchen drawer. She was, Hermione noticed, someone who always knew where the practical things were. "He'll need to know what happened. Not everything, but enough." "Will he help?" Harry asked. Daphne paused with the pen in her hand. "He follows the old ways," she said. "The ancient magic, what happened today, he'll recognize what it means. And he's a pragmatic man. He understands that when something old and powerful makes a choice, arguing with it is." She smiled very slightly, for the first time all day. "Inadvisable. Like trying to stop us at the door," Hermione said. "Exactly. Your aunt didn't try very hard," Harry said. "No," Hermione agreed. She thought about Petunia's face in the doorway. The complicated architecture of that expression. "I think she was relieved." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "I know she was." Nobody responded to that, because there wasn't much to say to it, and because sometimes the right response to a painful true thing is to just sit with it. That was something Hermione had always struggled with, the instinct to fix, to explain, to find the solution, but something in the bond today had taught her, in the space of a few hours, that Harry didn't need fixing. He just needed to not be alone. She picked up her tea, which was stone cold. "We should write to Dumbledore," she said. Daphne looked at her. "Write to him?" "We should respond to his letter," Hermione said. Formally. Politely. "Tell him Harry is safe, tell him he's being cared for, and tell him." She paused, finding the right words. "That the situation has changed." "Changed how?" "That's for him to worry about," Hermione said. Harry was watching her with an expression she was starting to recognize, that slightly tilted, slightly wondering look he had when something surprised him in a way he hadn't expected to be surprised. Like a person who'd lived so long with the assumption that no one was in his corner that someone being solidly in his corner was still, each time, a small shock. "You said he said. "What?" "You said we should write to him. You and Daphne have known me for—" He checked the clock on the wall, which said 7:30. 10 hours. "And?" Hermione said. He looked at her for a moment. "Nothing," he said. "I just noticed." Daphne was already writing her letter to her father. The scratch of the pen was the only sound in the kitchen, along with the owl on the windowsill ruffling its feathers in the evening air, and somewhere outside the sound of the garden, which was full of early summer and last light. Harry's hands were on the table. The bruise on his left arm was invisible under his sleeve, but Hermione knew it was there, felt it, sort of, at the edge of the bond, a dull background wrongness that made her jaw tight. She was 8 years old. She couldn't fix his arm tonight. She couldn't fix everything that had happened to him, or change the fact that it had happened, or go back. But she was here now, and Daphne was here, and whatever the ancient light had done to the three of them today, it had meant it, and so did she. "The blue room," Daphne said without looking up from her letter, "has a very good bed. Mrs. Prentice will have put proper sheets on it. And there are books in the study if you can't sleep. My father has about 400 history texts I've already read, so you'd be welcome to them." "That sounds—" Harry stopped. "That sounds really good, actually." "The bathroom down the hall has a bath, not just a shower," Daphne continued in the same tone, as though she weren't building a home for him room by room. "And Mrs. Prentice makes eggs in the morning. She won't mind how many you want." Harry swallowed. "Okay," he said. Daphne finished her letter, folded it, looked up. "Welcome to Greengrass House, Harry." Hermione caught his eye across the table. The bond was a warmth in her chest, constant now. The three of them triangulated and settled, 3 points of something that had no name in the ordinary world but was real in every way that mattered. She could feel Daphne, pen scratching precise on one side of her awareness. She could feel Harry, quiet and cautious and slowly, very slowly, in the way of something that had been waiting a long time to be thawed, beginning to feel safe. "We'll deal with Dumbledore tomorrow," Hermione said. "Tonight you sleep and eat and—" She searched for the word. "Exist. Without anyone making you be smaller than you are." Harry Potter looked down at the shoebox on the table, and the wondered stuffed dog beside it, and the half-eaten slice of bread on his plate, and the tea gone cold in his cup, and outside, the summer evening sliding into blue. "All right," he said softly. "He didn't say thank you?" Hermione was glad. "It wasn't the kind of thing you said thank you for, not when someone was just doing what anyone should have done years ago, not when it wasn't generosity so much as basic right, not when it was your friends looking after you, and you were theirs. He didn't say thank you, because they were already past that. They were already something else." Chapter 2. The weight of old names. Cyrus Greengrass arrived home from Edinburgh at 6 in the morning. Daphne heard the flow in the study ignite, that specific crack and whomp of someone stepping through a long-distance connection, and she was already sitting up in bed before her eyes were fully open. She'd half expected it. Her letter had reached her father by 9, and Cyrus Greengrass was not a man who read urgent correspondence from his daughter and went to bed. She was dressed and on the landing by the time he came out of the study. He was a tall man, her father, with the same dark hair and gray eyes she'd inherited, and the kind of face that was difficult to read until you'd known it a long time, and even then only sometimes. He moved with the unhurried precision of someone who had never been in a physical hurry because he'd always been clever enough to be in the right place before the emergency. He looked at Daphne on the landing, in her dressing gown, with the particular stillness of a man assembling a very complex picture. "The bond is real," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," Daphne said. He was quiet for a moment, his hand on the study doorframe. "A triad bond," he said, and his voice did something complicated with it, not quite all too controlled for all, but something in that direction. "I've read about them. They're theoretical. My grandfather's library has 3 texts that reference them, and all 3 texts suggest they haven't occurred in recorded history in the last 400 years. They occurred yesterday," Daphne said. "In Petunia Dursley's hallway." Cyrus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Where is he?" "Blue room. Asleep." "And the Granger girl?" "Rose room. Also asleep, probably." She had a lot of questions. "I imagine she did." He came the rest of the way down the hall and put one hand briefly on Daphne's head, not a pat, just a placement, warm and solid, and said, "You did the right thing. Both of you. All 3 of you." He paused. "Get dressed properly. I'll make the tea. We need to talk before Dumbledore arrives." Daphne looked up at him. "How long do we have?" Cyrus checked his watch. "He arrived at Privet Drive at 5 this morning. He's a thorough man, so he spent about 40 minutes there. He's currently—" Another pause, the kind her father made when he was calculating. "Approximately 20 minutes from our gate." "How do you know that?" "Because I know how Albus Dumbledore thinks," Cyrus said simply, and went to put the kettle on. Hermione was awake already. She'd been awake since 5, lying in the Rose Room's very comfortable bed with the bond running warm and quiet in her chest like a pilot light, and she'd been thinking. She'd been thinking about blood wards and protective enchantments and the fact that Dumbledore, who was apparently the most important person in the wizarding world, had looked at a boy in a cupboard and called it a sacrifice worth making. She wanted to understand that. She was someone who always wanted to understand things before she dismissed them, because sometimes the things you wanted to dismiss were true and that was important, and sometimes the things you wanted to believe were wrong and that was also important. So she lay in the dark and she built the case for Dumbledore in her head, gave him every benefit of the doubt, assumed the best intentions, followed the logic as far as it went. She could see the shape of it. A war. A prophecy, probably. A child who needed protection. Blood wards that required a blood relative. A calculation, cold and reluctant and very certain, that some suffering now prevented greater suffering later. She understood it. She understood it completely, and it made her furious in a very quiet, very specific way, the way you're furious when something is wrong, and you can't call it stupid because it isn't stupid, it's just wrong. She got up, got dressed in yesterday's clothes because she had no others, and went downstairs. Cyrus Greengrass was at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea already made, one for him and one clearly for whoever came down first, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway and said, without preamble, "Miss Granger, I understand you walked 4 miles down an unknown road because something told you to." "Yes," Hermione said. "And you weren't frightened?" She thought about that honestly. "I was interested," she said. "The fear came later, when I saw the cupboard." Cyrus Greengrass studied her for a moment. "Sit down," he said, "and tell me exactly what happened when the bond formed. Leave nothing out, however strange it seems." Hermione sat down and told him. She was good at recounting events, clear and sequential, nothing embellished, nothing minimized. Cyrus listened without interrupting once, which Hermione appreciated enormously, and when she finished he sat back in his chair and looked at the middle distance. "Ancient magic," he said, "is not a discipline. It's not something you study or practice. It exists underneath all of the structured magic we use the way bedrock exists underneath a building. We don't think about it, we don't access it, and it very rarely makes itself known. When it does," he paused, weighing words, "it doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't bond people casually or accidentally. A triad bond is a declaration." "A declaration of what?" Hermione asked. "That 3 people, in combination, are something the world needs." He said it without drama, like it was simply a fact. "Not necessarily something comfortable. Not something safe. Something necessary." Hermione absorbed this. "What does the bond actually do? Concretely?" Cyrus picked up his tea. "The texts disagree on specifics. But consistently, shared awareness, which you've already noticed. Amplify magic when in proximity. The 3 of you together will be significantly more powerful than the 3 of you separately. And," he paused again, "protection. A triad bond is self-defending. It will act in the interest of its members even without conscious direction. What does that look like?" "I don't know," he said. "I don't think anyone living knows. But I suspect we'll find out." Daphne appeared in the doorway in a fresh dress with her hair neatly replaited, looking wide awake in the way of someone who hadn't slept much but had used the time productively. She looked at Hermione, then at her father, and read the room in approximately half a second. "You've told her the basics," Cyrus said. "Dumbledore?" Daphne asked her father. 20 minutes. Maybe 15 now." Daphne sat down, poured herself tea, and looked at Hermione. "Harry needs to be awake," she said. "He should be there." "I'll go," Hermione said immediately, and was already standing. She knocked on the blue room door and got no response, which meant he was properly asleep, which meant he hadn't been sleeping properly at the Dursleys, which was fine. She noted it and shelved it and knocked again, louder. A pause. Then a muffled, "What?" "It's Hermione. Dumbledore's coming. You have about 15 minutes." A longer pause, then the sounds of someone getting up quickly. The door opened and Harry appeared, blinking, still wearing yesterday's enormous clothes, his hair doing something structurally improbable. He looked at her. Then he looked more awake. "How long have you been up?" "Since 5. "Of course you have," he said, without any sharpness in it. He rubbed his face. "Right. Dumbledore." He said the name the way you say a word you've heard many times without context, now suddenly being asked to give it weight. "Cyrus, Daphne's father, he's downstairs. He knows about the bond. He's going to handle the legal side, but he wants us in the room." Harry's eyes sharpened. "All 3 of us?" "Yes." He was already looking for his shoes. "Good," he said. There was something in the way he said it, just that single word, but solid as stone, no waver in it, that told Hermione he'd been doing his own thinking in the dark hours. He was 8 and he'd spent 8 years being told he was nothing, and he'd walked out of that house yesterday and slept in a proper bed and had tea made for him without asking, and he'd done his own arithmetic about what came next. Harry, she said. He looked at her. Whatever he says, whatever argument he makes, you don't have to go back. He held her gaze for a moment. The bond between them had a texture to it this morning, less raw than yesterday, more settled. I know, he said. Just making sure you know. I know, he said again, and the corners of his eyes moved. Thank you? Don't thank me, Hermione said, and headed for the stairs. Albus Dumbledore arrived not at the front door but at the garden gate, where he stopped and waited, which told Daphne exactly what she needed to know about his approach this morning. A man who came to the front door and knocked was a man arriving on equal terms. A man who stopped at the gate and waited was a man being deliberate about appearing respectful while controlling the encounter from the first moment. She watched him from the drawing-room window. He was, she had to admit, exactly what she'd expected, and not at all what she'd imagined. Tall, unmistakably old, with silver hair and half-moon spectacles and robes the color of deep water. He looked like someone from a painting. He looked like a very clever painting of wisdom that had learned to walk around. Her father went to the gate. She could see them through the window, speaking, just a moment, just a brief preliminary exchange of two men who know each other's type, and then her father opened the gate, and Dumbledore came up the path. He was led into the drawing-room, which was formal by design, and Daphne and Hermione and Harry were arranged on one sofa, not arranged, exactly, just sitting there, the three of them in a line, and Cyrus Greengrass sat in the chair that put the window behind him, which meant Dumbledore would be looking slightly into the light. Dumbledore looked at the three children. His eyes were blue, and they were, she'd heard the expression twinkling used about them, and she'd expected something performatively warm, something theatrical. The twinkle, she realized now, was real, and that was what made it complicated. It was genuine. He genuinely felt warmly toward them. He was genuinely, at this moment, looking at Harry with something that was very close to relief. He also genuinely intended to put Harry back in that cupboard. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice was the kind of voice that made you want to listen to it, resonant and kind and exactly calibrated to the person receiving it. I'm so very glad you're safe. Harry looked at him. His face was still. I didn't know I was in danger, he said. A small pause. The world outside your aunt's home can be. I was in danger inside my aunt's home, Harry said. Another pause, fractionally longer. Dumbledore's expression went through something, not caught out, exactly, more like a man who has anticipated an argument, and is now confirming its shape. I know that the Dursleys are not, he began. His arm, Hermione said. Dumbledore looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching. He has a bruise on his left forearm shaped like someone's grip, she said. He was wearing a jumper in July. His clothes don't fit him. He was locked in a cupboard under the stairs. I'm aware, Dumbledore said gently. Harry, you're aware, Harry said. Still that flat, clear stillness. You know what it's like there. The protections are worth more to you than I am, Harry said. I understand. I'm just not going back. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Daphne watched the look and read something in it she hadn't expected, a kind of grief, real and complicated, the grief of a man who believes the thing he's doing is necessary and hates that it's necessary and has made peace with hating it. She found she couldn't dismiss him as a villain. That made him considerably harder to deal with. I wonder, Dumbledore said, and his attention shifted now, taking in all three of them with the precision of a man who doesn't miss things. If I might ask about yesterday morning. Specifically about what three children did in Petunia Dursley's hallway. They held hands, Cyrus Greengrass said pleasantly from his chair. An ancient magic recognized something in them. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Cyrus. Something shifted in them, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. A triad bond, he said, quietly, almost to himself. You know what it is, Daphne said. I know what the records say it is, Dumbledore replied. I also know that the last recorded formation was in 1589. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the three of them with an expression that was genuinely not what Daphne had expected, which was calculation. It was closer to wonder, and underneath the wonder, something very much like worry. May I, with your permission, confirm it? What would that involve? Hermione said immediately. Simply observation, Dumbledore said. I won't touch anything. I won't alter anything. I have a sensitivity to magical signatures. I'd like to see it. Daphne looked at Harry. Harry gave the smallest shrug. Your call. She looked at Hermione, who looked back with the expression she had when she was reading a situation and had reached a conclusion. The conclusion, Daphne read, was, let him see it. We want him to understand what he's dealing with. All right, Daphne said. Dumbledore was still for a moment, just looking, just observing, and his expression did something quite unguarded. His brows lifted slightly. He looked, briefly, like a very old man encountering something larger than himself, and allowing himself to be moved by it. Extraordinary, he said softly. The resonance between you, all three, it's… He stopped. He pressed his lips together. Then, it's anchored in him. His eyes moved to Harry. The bond core is anchored in Harry. I didn't expect that. What does that mean? Harry said. It means, Dumbledore said carefully, that the protections you represent to these girls, and the protections they represent to you, are reciprocal, in a way I had not anticipated. He was quiet again. Then he said something that surprised all of them. I owe you an apology, Harry. Harry looked at him. Not a sufficient one, Dumbledore said. Nothing I say this morning will be sufficient. But I would like you to understand that the choice I made, placing you with the Dursleys, was made in the belief that it was the only way to keep you alive. I don't ask you to forgive that. I ask you only to understand that it wasn't made lightly, and it wasn't made without. His voice shifted, just slightly. Cost. Harry held the old man's gaze for a long time. If I were your grandson, he said finally, would you have put me there? The drawing room was very quiet. No, Dumbledore said. Just that. No qualification. Then you made a choice, Harry said. And I made mine. The legal conversation took 2 more hours, most of which Hermione spent listening very intently while Cyrus Greengrass and Albus Dumbledore discussed things like guardian rights, wards, ministry registration, and something called the Wiesengemat's oversight provisions for the children of deceased order members. What emerged eventually was this: the blood wards at Privet Drive were gone now, dissolved when Harry left. They couldn't be re-established without Harry's willing presence, and Harry wasn't willing. The protections they'd offered, real, Hermione grudgingly concluded, genuinely protective against Voldemort's remaining followers, would need to be replaced by something else. The triad bond, Cyrus said in a tone that was not quite a statement and not quite a suggestion, offers its own protections. Per the texts. Dumbledore's expression said he was aware of this and was doing his own rapid arithmetic about it. The bond is young, he said. It formed yesterday. Its protections are potential, not yet established. Then we'll establish them, Hermione said. Everyone in the room looked at her. She had her book open on her knee. She'd retrieved it from the kitchen, The Brief History of Time, which was admittedly not relevant, but having a book helped her think, and she looked up from it to find 4 adults' worth of attention on her face. She didn't flinch. We'll learn, she said. We've got. She did the arithmetic quickly. 3 years before Hogwarts. We'll learn what we need to learn. Daphne's family has resources and library access. My family, my parents can be told. They're not, they'll understand. She stopped, took a breath. And Harry stays here. Or somewhere safe. Not Privet Drive. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. The twinkle was gone, replaced by something more direct. Miss Granger, he said, how long have you known about the wizarding world? Since yesterday, she said. And you're prepared to? I walked 4 miles to find Harry, she said. I'm prepared for quite a lot. Something happened in Dumbledore's face. It was brief, a flicker, but she caught it. He was reassessing her. She didn't mind. She preferred to be underestimated first and understood accurately second. Cyrus, Dumbledore said finally. If you're prepared to assume formal guardianship for the summer, I am, Cyrus said immediately. Temporary guardianship while the Wisengamot arrangement is formalized. I'll file the paperwork today. There will be opposition, Dumbledore said. Not from me. But from others. There usually is, Cyrus said pleasantly. Dumbledore rose. He looked at Harry one more time, and Harry looked back at him, and this time there was something more complex in it, not forgiveness, not by a long way, but something that might have been the beginning of a mutual understanding. Two people seeing each other clearly and neither pretending otherwise. I will come again, Dumbledore said. Not to take you back, Harry. But because I would like to be involved. If you'll permit it. Harry thought about it. You can come, he said. But I want answers. Real ones. About what happened to my parents. About the prophecy. About. Dumbledore went still. You know about a prophecy? Not yet, Harry said. But there is one, isn't there? About me. Another long pause. Then Dumbledore did something none of them expected. He laughed. It was genuine, and it was rueful, and it carried in it a long history of underestimating children. Yes, he said. There is. And I think yes. I think you have earned the right to know it. He paused at the drawing-room door. I'll return next week if you'll have me. And I'll bring the truth. He left. They heard the garden gate open and close. The drawing-room was quiet for a moment. Well, Hermione said. That went better than I expected. Cyrus Greengrass was true to his word. By midday the temporary guardianship was filed. By evening he'd sent an owl to Hermione's parents, a carefully worded letter, almost aggressively reasonable, that explained the situation in language designed for people who had no context for the wizarding world. He asked Hermione to write a postscript, which she did. Mom, Dad, I know this is a lot. But I need you to read this and then call the number at the bottom. I'll explain everything. Please trust me. Her parents, being the particular kind of people who had raised Hermione, called the number. Cyrus spoke to them for 40 minutes. Then Helena Granger asked to speak to her daughter, and Hermione spent 20 minutes reassuring her mother, and then her mother said, Are these people good people, Hermione? And Hermione said yes, and her mother said, All right then. We'll come on Saturday. Harry spent that day alternating between the study and the kitchen, sometimes reading the books Daphne recommended, sometimes sitting at the kitchen table while Mrs. Prentice moved around him in the comfortable way that some older people have with children, treating their presence as perfectly normal, asking him occasionally whether he wanted more toast, not requiring him to perform happiness or gratitude. Daphne observed this with satisfaction. Mrs. Prentice had a talent for making people feel like they were exactly the right size for the space they were in. His arm had been dealt with by noon. Cyrus knew a healer, a quiet woman named Tilda who came, looked at the bruise, looked at Harry's general condition, took a breath through her nose, said nothing, and applied a charm that faded the bruise to nothing in about 4 minutes. She also, very quietly, asked Harry some questions that were framed as casual but weren't, and she wrote things down in a small notebook, and when she left she had a look on her face that was very controlled and extremely angry. Harry watched the bruise disappear and sat with his sleeve rolled down afterward, running his thumb over the place where it had been. Does it feel strange? Daphne asked. It feels like nothing, he said. Which is, he paused, strange. Magic, she said. Yeah. He looked at his arm. It's really real, isn't it? All of it. It's really real, she said. I always knew things happened. he said slowly, like he was unpacking something he'd been carrying for a long time. The boa constrictor. Other things. Petunia she'd shout at me about it. Call me. He stopped. She had a word she used. Freak, Daphne said quietly. He looked at her quickly. It's a common one, she said, keeping her voice neutral. In families like yours. Families who know about magic and are frightened of it. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. No, she agreed. But I'm still sorry it happened. Harry was quiet. Outside, the garden was loud with afternoon birds and the sound of the sprinkler Cyrus had set going on the lawn's far edge. Harry watched the window for a moment, and then he said, "She was scared. Petunia." I know she was. Underneath it, I know she was scared of me. She was scared of what she didn't understand. Daphne said carefully. That's not the same as it being your fault. I know, he said. Then, I don't hate her. You don't have to. I thought I was supposed to. No one's making you feel anything about her, Daphne said. You can feel however you actually feel. He looked at her with that slightly startled expression she was already becoming familiar with, the expression of someone encountering the radical concept that their feelings were allowed to exist without being managed. You're quite direct, he said. I come from a family that considers vagueness a waste of everyone's time, she said. He almost smiled. I like that. I know, she said, and because she didn't know, she could feel it through the bond, the same way she could feel Hermione's quick, bright satisfaction whenever she'd solved something, the same way she could feel Harry's tentative, careful warmth when something pleased him. She let herself smile back. The bond was, as the days passed, a constant and evolving thing. It wasn't like having someone in your head. It was more like weather. Hermione spent an afternoon trying to find the right analogy and settled on. It was like knowing what season it was for the other two people, without knowing what they were specifically doing or thinking. She could feel when Daphne was focused, when Harry was sad, when either of them was excited. She could feel, more clearly than anything else, when they were near versus far, a warmth that rose and settled depending on physical proximity. When they were in the same room it was comfortable and complete. When one of them left the grounds it was like a window opening in winter. Not painful. Just noticeable. They also, in those first few days, began to discover what it did to their magic. The first accidental discovery happened on Wednesday, when Hermione was reading in the garden and Daphne was nearby working through a letter to her mother and Harry was throwing stones into the ornamental pond with the specific lack of purpose of someone who has never been allowed to be bored before and is finding it quite enjoyable. A crow landed in the oak tree above Hermione's head and knocked a branch down, and the branch swung toward her, and without thinking, without any conscious direction, she looked up and the branch stopped. Hung in midair. Then moved itself gently to one side. She stared at it. You did that? Harry said from the pond. Yes, she said. But that's not, I've done accidental magic before, but not like. She stopped. She looked at Daphne. Daphne had looked up from her letter. Did you feel like something pulled? Daphne said. Yes. A second before you did it. I felt it too, Harry said. He'd stood up. He was looking at Hermione with his head tilted. Like a charge. They looked at each other. Then, carefully, with the precision of three children who were going to be methodical about this because they had collectively decided that understanding something was the only responsible approach to it, they sat down on the grass and tried to figure out what they'd done. It took 40 minutes and 12 separate attempts, some of which worked and some of which produced nothing, before they understood proximity mattered. When all three of them were consciously directing the same intention, together, the magic that resulted was not the magic of one of them amplified by three. It was something different in kind, not just degree. The branch hadn't just stopped, it had stopped, been assessed, been moved with precision, all in the half-second between the bond firing and Hermione's conscious awareness of the event. It's faster than thinking, Harry said, trying to push a stone up from the ground and managing about a centimeter of lift. Alone, he could do that much, apparently, small, instinctive, and precise. When the three of us did it together, it thought for us, Hermione said. Almost. The bond, Daphne said quietly. They looked at each other. We need books, Hermione said. My father has 3 texts that reference triad magic specifically, Daphne said. And there's Flourish and Blots, they'll have more. And Gringotts. Harry, do you know what your parents left you? Financially? Harry blinked. I didn't know, I assumed. I don't know anything about my parents. Dumbledore's going to tell us some things next week, Daphne said. In the meantime, your parents were a pure-blood Potter and a Muggle-born Evans, and the Potters are an old family. Ancient, actually. There will be an account at Gringotts. There should be a key. She paused. Was there anything in the shoebox? Harry looked up. He went inside. He came back with the shoebox and sat down on the grass with it between them. He'd opened it before, privately. Hermione could feel that through the bond, the private complexity of what was inside. But this was the first time he opened it with them watching, which meant something. Inside, 2 photographs. A key. A letter in a handwriting that slanted to the right. A woman's ring. A folded piece of paper with numbers on it that turned out to be a Gringotts account reference. Harry held one of the photographs. It was moving. Hermione had no context for that yet, and seeing a photograph where the people in it waved and laughed was startling, even now. A young woman with red hair and green eyes. A young man who looked exactly, bewilderingly, like Harry but with more confidence in the way he stood. They were laughing at something off-frame, and the young woman kept looking at the young man, and the young man kept looking at the young woman, and Hermione had to look away because it was very private, somehow. Harry didn't say anything. He just looked at the photograph for a while. Then he put it carefully back in the box, and he said, with considerable steadiness, Right. Gringotts then. When your father gets back, Daphne said, we'll ask about going to Diagon Alley. There's no reason we can't go this week. We're 8, Harry said. 8-year-olds with a provisional Gringotts account reference and a triad bond, Daphne said. I think the goblins will see us. The goblins will see anyone with an account reference, Hermione said, who had read about goblins in one of Cyrus's texts already. They don't care about age or blood status or anything. They care about gold and legal standing. I like them already, Harry said. Dumbledore came back on Monday, as promised. He came through the front door this time, was shown into the drawing room, accepted tea, and sat down. He looked like a man who had spent a week preparing to have a conversation he'd been avoiding for 8 years. True to his word, he told them the truth. He told them about Voldemort, Tom Riddle, he said, and Harry repeated the name quietly, stripped of its terror. He told them about the war, and about Harry's parents, and about the night Godric's Hollow burned. He told them about the prophecy, and he said it exactly, every word, watching Harry's face as he did. He told them about why he'd chosen the Dursleys, and he explained the blood ward magic, and he admitted that he had known conditions that were not ideal, and he said that word, not ideal, and Hermione made a sound, quiet, through her nose, and Dumbledore heard it and corrected himself. I knew it was harmful. I believed it was necessary. He also told them something he hadn't planned to, which Hermione could tell because he paused before it and seemed to be making a decision. He told them that the night Voldemort's curse rebounded, something in Harry had preserved it, not destroyed it. That a remnant of Voldemort existed somewhere. Possibly multiple somewhere. The drawing room went very quiet. Horcruxes, Daphne said. Dumbledore looked at her with sharp attention. Where did you hear that word? My grandfather's library, she said. The darkest shelf. The kind of books you need permission to look at. A pause. I have very understanding grandparents. Dumbledore stared at her for a moment, and Hermione got the impression he was substantially revising his assessment of Daphne Greengrass. How many? Harry said. I believe. Dumbledore began. How many? Harry said again. His voice was flat and clear, and there was nothing of an 8-year-old in it. He was sitting forward slightly, elbows on his knees, with the focused attention of someone doing math in their head. If you had to guess, how many? Dumbledore looked at him. Something in the old man's face was struggling, Hermione thought, between the reflex to protect and the growing understanding that protection was no longer something he could impose. 6, he said. Possibly 7, including the original soul. Harry sat back. He looked at Hermione. She looked at Daphne. Something passed through the bond between the three of them, not words, just a mutual acknowledgement, a collective drawing of breath, a shared recognition of the shape of the problem. Then Harry looked at Dumbledore and said, "We're going to help you find them." Dumbledore opened his mouth. "We're not asking," Harry said. "We're telling you what's going to happen. We're 3 years from Hogwarts. We're going to spend those 3 years learning everything we can, and when we get there, we're going to start finding them." He paused. "With or without your help. But I'd rather with." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. The twinkling blue eyes and the silver beard and the ancient, deeply complicated face of a man looking at a child who had just rearranged his entire plan. "You are very much like your mother," Dumbledore said softly. "She also had a habit of making decisions and then informing people of them." "Is that a yes?" Hermione said. Dumbledore looked at her. Then at Daphne. Then at Harry again. He picked up his tea, which had gone cold, and he took a sip of cold tea without flinching, and then he set the cup down, and he said, "I'll bring you books." "Good start," Hermione said. "We'll need access to restricted sections," Daphne said. "I imagined you might. And we'll need to visit Greengrass this week," Harry said. "For the Potter account. You'll facilitate that." Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "You've quite recovered your confidence." Harry looked at him steadily. "I had confidence," he said. "I just didn't have anywhere to put it." Dumbledore stood to leave. At the door he paused, and he looked back at the three of them on the sofa, the bushy-haired girl and the ice-eyed girl and the boy with the untidy hair and the green eyes, and his expression did something that was probably not something Albus Dumbledore often let his expression do. It went unguarded, and what was under the guardedness was grief and guilt, and something that was very tentatively, very cautiously beginning to be something like hope. "I'll send books tomorrow," he said. "And I'll arrange Greengrass for Thursday." He left. They heard the garden gate. The bond settled warm between the three of them in the afternoon light. 7 Horcruxes, Harry said, not looking at either of them. His voice was thinking out loud. "We have time," Daphne said. "We have 3 years before Hogwarts," Hermione said. "And however many years after. We have time, and we have resources, and—" She paused, and let herself feel it through the bond, the three of them together in the room, warm and strange and real. "We have each other." Harry looked at the window. The garden was green and gold in the late afternoon, the sprinkler turning, the birds returning to the oak tree. He looked like a person taking a very slow, very careful breath of something clean. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We do." Chapter 3. The merchants of Blood Diagon Alley smelled like candle wax and old paper and something underneath both that Hermione couldn't name, not quite ozone, not quite earth, something that had no word in any book she'd read, which meant she needed a new book immediately. She was standing just inside the leaky cauldron entrance to the alley, one step past the brick archway that Cyrus had tapped open with his wand, and the alley sprawled ahead of her in both directions, crooked and colorful and absolutely nothing like the Surrey High Street. Shops leaned against each other at angles that suggested a collective agreement to ignore structural engineering. Signs swung without wind. An owl post office occupied what appeared to be a building that had been designed for something else entirely, and never bothered to change. Above the cobblestones, the sky was a late August blue, and the whole thing hummed, very quietly, with the sound of a world conducting its own business. "Close your mouth," Daphne said from slightly behind her. "I'm not." Hermione closed her mouth. "I'm gathering information." "You're staring." "I'm allowed to stare." I've never been here before. Fair, Daphne admitted, and came to stand beside her. Harry was on her other side, and he wasn't staring. He was doing what he sometimes did, that particular kind of looking that wasn't quite staring, more like photographing, taking in everything in careful, methodical sweeps. He had new clothes now. Cyrus had taken him shopping on the Muggle High Street on Friday, quietly and without fuss, and Harry had stood in front of the mirror in the shop with an expression of genuine disorientation at the sight of clothes that were his actual size. He was still getting used to that, Hermione thought. The space his body was actually allowed to take up. Right, Cyrus said from behind them. He was in Muggle clothes today, a very good linen jacket, the kind that was obviously expensive without advertising it, because Helena and Robert Granger were with them, and Cyrus Greengrass was a man who understood optics. Gringotts first. Then the bookshops. Then everything else, Hermione said. Everything else, her father agreed from her left, with the good-natured weariness of a man who had accepted, somewhere around age 3, that his daughter's appetite for everything else was a permanent feature of his life. Robert Granger was a solid, pleasant man with kind eyes and reading glasses he kept forgetting to take off, and he had taken the revelation of the wizarding world with the equanimity of someone who had already reconciled himself to raising someone exceptional. He'd asked 6 very precise questions after Cyrus's letter. Then he'd said right then in the tone that meant he was filing the information, and that had been that. Helena Granger was currently staring at an apothecary window with the expression of someone who was a dentist by training and was therefore fascinated and horrified in equal measure by a display that included 3 different kinds of unidentified eyeballs. "Mom," Hermione said. "I'm fine," Helena said. It's a lot. We can go slower, don't you dare go slower on my account," Helena said, straightening up. She looked like Hermione, somewhat. Same tendency toward wild hair, same expression of someone processing at speed. "I want to see everything. I'm just processing it in stages." Hermione felt a rush of affection so sudden it almost knocked her sideways. She took her mother's hand briefly and then let go, because they had places to be. Gringotts Bank was enormous in the way of things designed to make you feel small, which Hermione thought was deliberate. The marble floors and the high ceilings and the rows of goblins at their high counters, all of it calculated to establish, from the first moment, exactly where the power in this transaction resided. She approved of it in a purely architectural sense while filing it under understand your negotiating position before entering. The goblin who processed Harry's access request was named Hook Fong, according to the nameplate, and he had the sharp-featured professional neutrality of someone who had spent a very long time pretending that the people on the other side of his counter were not, technically, slightly beneath him. He took the account reference, looked at Harry, looked at the reference again, and then did something slightly surprising. He looked at all 3 children simultaneously, very quickly, and something shifted in his expression. Not much. A flicker. "The account holder," Hookfine said, addressing Harry. "You'll need to provide a blood confirmation." "That's standard?" Cyrus said. "Standard for primary heir access on a sealed estate account," Hookfang said without inflection. "The Potter account has been sealed under Order of Merlin provisions since 1981. The seal requires confirmed lineage to lift." Harry looked at the small knife Hookfang produced. Then at Cyrus, who nodded slightly. Then at Hermione, who nodded in a way that clearly meant "I've already assessed this and it's fine." He pressed his thumb to the blade, barely a nick, and pressed it to the document, and the parchment flared gold briefly, and Hook Fong looked at it, and something moved across his face that Hermione catalogued as impressed, trying not to show it. "The Potter estate," Hook Fong said, "is considerably more extensive than the standard records indicate." He paused. "Your account manager will need to provide a full summary. This may take some time." "How much time?" Harry said. 2 hours, approximately. "Can we look at the rest of the alley while the summary is prepared?" Daphne said. Hook Fong looked at her. Then he looked at the 3 of them together again, and that same flicker crossed his face. "You may," he said. Return at noon. The account manager will see you. They were almost to the door when Hook Fang spoke again. The bond? He said, and his voice was different, lower, more deliberate, stripped of professional neutrality. It is recognized by Greengrass under the Accord of Blood Right, 1342. Any action taken against the members of a recognized triad bond by parties with Greengrass holdings is recorded and may constitute breach of accord. They turned. Hook Fang was looking at his ledger, apparently absorbed in it. Is that something we need to know? Harry said. Simply standard practice. Hook Fang said, and turned a page. Noon, Mr. Potter. They filed out into the sunlight. On the steps, Hermione looked at Daphne. The Accord of 1342. I've heard of it, Daphne said quietly. My father mentioned it. It means any major house with Greengrass holdings, the Malfoys, the Knotts, the Parkinsons, can't take direct action against us without triggering a financial audit. That's why he told us, Harry said. Yes. So the goblins are on our side, Hermione said. Not our side. But they've acknowledged the bond has legal standing. That's not nothing. Harry looked back at the white marble of the bank, gleaming in the August sun. Useful, he said. Very, Daphne agreed. They split naturally into two groups for the hour before noon, Cyrus taking Harry to look at wandwood samples in a specialty shop, because Harry had become quietly fascinated with wand lore after Dumbledore's books arrived, and Helena accompanying Daphne and Hermione into Flourish and Blots. The bookshop was exactly what a bookshop should be, which was to say, overwhelming, slightly disorganized, full of promises. Hermione stood just inside the door and breathed in the smell and felt, very genuinely, that this was perhaps the best place she'd ever been. You're doing it again, Daphne said. I'm allowed, Hermione said, and went to the history section. She'd made a list, because she always made lists. The list had 17 items on it. Daphne had reviewed the list that morning and added 4 more from memory, and crossed out 2 that she already had in the Greengrass library. They worked through the shelves with the efficient complementarity that had been developing between them over the past 2 weeks. Hermione finding things quickly and Daphne assessing whether they were worth the shelf space, a division of labor that had emerged organically and that worked very well. Helena Granger wandered the shop with the expression of someone trying to build a mental map of a country they hadn't known existed. She paused at the history section, pulled out a book titled A Thousand Years of Magical Britain, and stood there reading the first page. This is incredible, she said softly. There are better ones, Daphne said, and handed her the Living History of Magical Practice, Volume 1 without looking up from the shelf. That one is more comprehensive and less romanticized. Helena looked at her. Then at the book. Then she smiled. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, Daphne said, and went back to assessing the shelf. Hermione watched this out of the corner of her eye and filed it away. It was a small thing, but it mattered, the ease with which Daphne did that, the complete absence of condescension. Her mother had worried, privately and aloud to Hermione's father, that the wizarding world might not be a kind place for someone who had arrived knowing nothing. Daphne Greengrass was not a girl given to demonstrations of warmth, but her respect was real and very consistent, and respect, Hermione had decided, was worth more than warmth. She was reaching for a copy of Invisible Architecture, the structure of ancient magical bonds when she felt it, a prickle through the bond, distinctive, coming from Harry's direction. Not alarm. Just attention. The feeling the bond produced when Harry noticed something he didn't like. She put the book under her arm and said to Daphne, quietly, Harry. Daphne was already moving. The confrontation, when they got back out into the alley, was not loud. The loudest confrontations rarely were, in Hermione's limited but growing experience of the wizarding world. They happened in the middle distance, politely dressed, with sharp teeth inside the politeness. Lucius Malfoy was not a dramatic man. He was the opposite, contained and elegant in robes that were impeccably tailored, with silver pale hair and a cane that Hermione clocked immediately as more than decorative. He was standing near the entrance to Gringotts with Cyrus Greengrass and Harry, and the conversation they were having was the kind of conversation where all three participants were being entirely civilized and at least two of them were aware they were in a fight. A boy stood slightly behind Malfoy, the same age as them, blond, with a face that had already learned the expressions his father's face wore. He was looking at Harry with the assessing look of someone who'd been told things about this person, and was now doing empirical verification. "Daphne," Lucius Malfoy said, when they arrived, and he said it pleasantly, and he said it like someone who had known her since she was born, which he had. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Lord Malfoy," Daphne said, with perfect Greengrass composure. His eyes moved to Hermione. They lingered for exactly 1 beat too long, the kind of pause that was calibrated to be slightly insulting without being actionable. "And this must be the Granger girl," he said. "Cyrus mentioned you'd taken in some strays." Hermione kept her face clear. She was 8 years old and she had read 40 books about the wizarding world in 2 weeks, and she was standing in Diagon Alley in new jeans next to one of the most influential men in magical Britain. She kept her face clear, and she filed the word strays, and she smiled pleasantly. "Hermione Granger," she said. "It's very nice to meet you." His eyes assessed her the way they'd assessed Daphne, quickly, accurately, not entirely showing what he found. "Granger," he said. "Not a magical family." "No," Hermione agreed. "My parents are dentists." "Ah." A smile that had learned to look warm. "Well, the magical world is welcoming of all talented individuals." The all talented individuals had a specific, thin sound to it, like something said for the record. "That's good to know," Hermione said, still smiling. Harry was standing with his hands in the pockets of his new jeans and his face in the expression Hermione had come to think of as his listening mode, very still, eyes moving, taking everything in and giving nothing back. He looked at the Malfoy boy without any particular expression. "Draco," Lucius said, with the smooth inevitability of a man who had planned this introduction. "You'll know of Harry Potter, of course." Draco Malfoy stepped forward. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. They were roughly the same height, which Draco seemed to find slightly surprising, as though he'd expected Harry to be either larger or smaller than this. "I know the name," Draco said. He said it with a sort of studied neutrality that was trying to be sophisticated and was nearly there. "Nearly. My father says you're quite important." "Does he?" Harry said. "To the wizarding world. What happened to you know who?" A pause, and in the pause was the particular quality of a boy who had been coached on what to say and was now running a slight deviation from the script. It must have been strange. Growing up with muggles. "Strange how?" Harry said. Draco looked uncertain for the first time. "I just meant, not knowing any of this." He gestured at the alley. "It's rather a lot to miss." "I didn't miss it," Harry said. "I just didn't know it yet." Draco processed this. Then something shifted in his face, something younger and less coached. "Can you do magic yet? Like on purpose?" "Some," Harry said. "Can you?" "A bit," Draco said, with transparent pride. "My father says I have exceptional natural talent." "Then we might be in the same year," Harry said. "When we get to Hogwarts." Draco brightened and then caught himself brightening and arranged his face more carefully. "We might be," he said, with performed indifference. The two fathers had been conducting their own conversation overhead during this, a conversation Hermione was simultaneously following. Lucius was asking, with great politeness, about temporary guardianship arrangements. Cyrus was explaining, with equal politeness, that the arrangements were formal and registered with the ministry and entirely within legal precedent. Lucius was noting, with great politeness, that some members of the Wisengamot might find the arrangement unusual. Cyrus was agreeing, with equal politeness, that unusual things sometimes made an impression. This conversation was about territory. Not Harry specifically, not yet, it was the probing kind, the kind where you press along the edges of something to find where it gives. Hermione moved to stand just slightly closer to Harry. Not protective, exactly. Just visible. She felt Daphne do the same from his other side, and she knew Daphne was doing it consciously, the same way she was, because the bond was running clear and deliberate between the three of them. Lucius Malfoy's eyes dropped to the three of them. She saw the moment he noticed, really noticed, the way they were standing. She saw him understand something, recalculate something, and she saw the first real flash of something under the polish. It wasn't quite concern. It was the look of a man who has assessed a situation and found it more complicated than he expected. "I've heard a rumor," he said, very casually, in the way of someone who does not speak casually, "about ancient magic. In Surrey last month." "Rumors are interesting things," Cyrus said pleasantly. "They are." Lucius looked at the three children. "Rumors about a triad bond, specifically." He smiled. "I didn't believe it, of course. Such things are theoretical." "Many things are theoretical," Daphne said, "until they aren't." Lucius Malfoy looked at her. His own daughter's age. Dressed in a blue dress, neat plait, gray eyes meeting his with the absolute composure of a girl who had known exactly what she was going to say and had said it. Something moved in his face. It was the expression of a man recalibrating substantially. "Daphne," he said, with what seemed like genuine warmth, "you've grown up." "I had a helpful summer," she said. He looked at Harry one more time. Harry looked back. There was no challenge in Harry's expression, no aggression, none of the posturing Draco was still performing at the edges of the interaction. Just that clear, steady, extremely attentive watching. "I look forward to seeing you at Hogwarts," Lucius said. The remark was addressed to the general group, but the weight of it landed on Harry. "Me too," Harry said. Lucius Malfoy made his polished goodbye to Cyrus and walked away down the alley, Draco falling into step beside him. Draco looked back once. Harry raised a hand in something that was halfway between a wave and a salute. Draco's mouth twitched, and then he was gone. "Well," Cyrus said under his breath. "He knows," Hermione said. "Yes," Cyrus agreed. "He's going to be a problem," Daphne said. "He's going to be cautious," her father corrected. "Which is not the same thing. Lucius is not a man who moves against things he doesn't understand. He'll watch first." He paused. "Which gives us time." "Time for what?" Harry said. Cyrus looked at him. "To become the kind of problem that's not worth the cost of making," he said. "Come on." Greengrass. The account manager's name was Charclaw, and he did not waste time. He produced 4 parchment rolls that together constituted the Potter Estate summary, and he laid them out on the desk with the efficient manner of someone who had spent 3 hours preparing this, and was prepared to spend as long as necessary explaining it. Cyrus sat beside Harry. Daphne and Hermione sat slightly behind. The Potter estate was, as Hook Fawn had suggested, considerably more extensive than standard records indicated. There was the main vault, gold, a significant amount, enough that even Cyrus's expression shifted slightly when he saw the figure. There were 2 property holdings, Godric's Hollow, which was damaged but standing, and a second property in Scotland that the records listed as Cair Potter, apparently a small estate that predated the Godric's Hollow house by 200 years. There were also holdings in several Wisengamot-registered ventures, including a share in a publishing house and an investment in a spell components importer that had been quietly generating returns since 1953. Harry sat in the chair across from Charclaw and listened to all of this with the stillness that Hermione associated with him processing something large. "There's also this," Charclaw said, and produced a separate envelope from a locked drawer. He handed it to Harry. "This was deposited in the vault by Albus Dumbledore in November 1981 with instructions to deliver it to you upon confirmed estate access." Harry looked at the envelope. His name was on it in a handwriting that slanted to the right. "You don't have to open it here," Hermione said quietly. He turned it over once. Then he looked up at Charclaw. "Can we set up a management structure? I'm not of age, I can't manage accounts myself, but I'd like someone I choose to have oversight. Not just automatic ministry provision." Charclaw looked at him with flat professional respect, which Hermione was learning was the goblin equivalent of being genuinely impressed. The account holder can designate a non-ministry oversight trustee at any age, provided the trustee holds Gringotts standing, he said. Mr. Greengrass, for instance. Yes, Harry said, and looked at Cyrus. Cyrus raised his eyebrows fractionally, which was approximately as much as he raised them about anything. I'd be honored, he said. You don't have to, Harry, Cyrus said in the tone that had become, in 2 weeks, oddly familiar. I'd be honored. Harry looked at the account reference number, at the parchment rolls, at the envelope in his hands. At the neat columns of gold figures that meant he wasn't nothing, he wasn't a burden, he wasn't surviving on someone else's charity. He had resources, he had standing, he had the machinery to move in the world without depending on anyone's permission. Okay, he said. Let's set it up. They were back in the alley by 1:30, loaded with books and potion ingredients and, in Hermione's case, a wizarding encyclopedia set that her mother had purchased without asking the price and refused to discuss when Hermione pointed out they probably couldn't afford it. Your father and I discussed it, Helena said serenely. When? While you and Daphne were arguing about the annotated versus unannotated edition. We weren't arguing, we were negotiating vigorously, Daphne said. I maintain the annotated edition is useful for foundational study. The annotations are 50 years out of date and skew the reader's interpretation, ladies, Harry said. We got both. They had got both. Hermione subsided, pleased. They ate at a small cafe on the lower end of the alley, a place with outside tables and mismatched chairs that served things Hermione didn't entirely recognize and found she liked. Harry ordered with the quiet intensity of someone who had spent 8 years being uncertain about food, which meant ordering enough of it to feel sure. He ate without saying much. Hermione watched him out of the corner of her eye and felt through the bond the slow, steady pulse of something that was not quite calm but was moving toward it. He had the envelope in his jacket pocket. He hadn't mentioned it. Harry, she said eventually. The letter. He looked at her. Then at Daphne, who met his eyes and then looked at her own food, which was as much privacy as Daphne Greengrass offered. Tonight, he said. I'll read it tonight. Hermione nodded. She didn't push. She'd learned, in the past 2 weeks, that Harry needed to choose his own when for things, because choosing his own when was still new to him. Most of his life had been spent on someone else's schedule. The Malfoy situation, Daphne said, changing the subject with the precision of someone who was doing it deliberately, and knew they'd see it. I've been thinking about what Father said. The cautious approach. Lucius Malfoy isn't our enemy right now, Harry said. No, Daphne said. He's an observer. He'll decide based on what he sees over the next few years whether we're worth attaching himself to or worth opposing. He was one of Voldemort's people, wasn't he? Hermione said. It wasn't quite a question. He claimed he was under the Imperius curse, Daphne said. Most people accepted that. Some people believed it. They're different things. He's a pragmatist, Cyrus said from behind his tea. He backs power. The question is whether he decides our power is worth more aligned with us or opposed to us. And Draco? Harry said. A pause around the table. Draco is 10 years old, Hermione said carefully. He's been told exactly what to think about everything. That doesn't mean I know, Harry said. I'm not writing him off. He pushed a fork around his plate. He's not his father. Not yet. Something in the way he said not yet made Hermione think Harry was not only talking about Draco. Hogwarts is 2 years away, Daphne said. By then, Lord Malfoy will have made his assessment, and Draco will have had 2 more years of being told what to think. We can't predict what that produces. We'll deal with it when it comes, Harry said. The healthy approach, Cyrus said dryly. My parents' approach, Harry said, without thinking, and then still briefly. He looked at his plate. Dumbledore said, my dad was like that. Deal with it when it arrives. Your mother planned ahead, Daphne said quietly, not looking at him. From what I understand. Yeah. Harry was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's why they made a good team. No one said anything. The alley moved around them, a cart rolling past, two witches arguing cheerfully about something near the apothecary, a child somewhere near the ice cream parlor making a sound of pure joy at something. The afternoon was warm and unhurried. Harry reached into his pocket and touched the envelope without taking it out. Then he moved his hand away. 2 years, he said. Let's not waste them. I have a curriculum, Hermione said immediately. Of course you do, Harry said. It covers theoretical magic, history of magic, actual history, not just what they teach at Hogwarts, magical law, Latin, and a basic overview of the main magical disciplines so we can make informed choices about where to specialize. Latin, Harry said. It's the basis of most spell construction. I'll do Latin, he said. I'm just what? He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved. I went from a cupboard under some stairs to a curriculum in 2 weeks. Fast learner, Hermione said. You two are going to kill me, he said with the warmth she was learning to hear under his flat delivery. The bond would prevent it, Daphne said calmly. We're invested in your survival. That's the most Daphne thing you've ever said, Hermione told her. I know, Daphne said, and sipped her tea with great dignity. The letter was from his mother. He read it that night with the door closed, and Hermione lay in her room and felt through the bond the shape of it, not the words, she couldn't feel words, but the quality of the feeling. It was long and it was painful, and it was also, underneath the pain, something warm. Something that moved very slowly from grief towards something more complicated and more stable. She didn't go to him. Daphne didn't either. They both understood, separately, that this was something Harry needed to do in the dark with the door closed, needed to do privately in the way of people who have never been permitted privacy, and are only now learning how to use it. An hour later she heard his door open. Footsteps on the landing. Then a knock at her door. She opened it. Harry was standing there in his pajamas, new ones, that fit, which still occasionally seemed to surprise him, with the letter folded in one hand and his eyes red but dry, and the expression on his face was something she hadn't seen on him before. Settled, in a way he hadn't been. Like something had been handed to him, and he'd found a place to put it. She knew, he said without preamble. She knew something might happen. She wrote the letter before Godric's Hollow, gave it to Dumbledore for safekeeping. He paused. She wrote about the bond magic. She didn't predict this specifically. But she wrote, she said there was something in our family, the Potter line. An attunement to ancient magic. He stopped. She thought it might surface in me someday. She didn't know what form it would take. Hermione held his gaze. She knew what she was, she said. Yeah. He looked at the letter. She said that if I was reading this, things had gone wrong, but that didn't mean they couldn't go right. A pause. She sounds like she was a lot. She sounds extraordinary, Hermione said. She was a Muggleborn, he said. Did you know that? Dumbledore mentioned it. She was the first person in her family. Like you? Something warm moved through Hermione that she didn't entirely have language for. Harry, she would have liked you, he said. I think she would have liked both of you. He glanced down the landing to where Daphne's room was dark under the door. I think she probably would have found Daphne hilarious, and Daphne would have pretended not to appreciate it. Accurate, Hermione said. He almost laughed. It was brief and quiet, barely there, but genuine. Right, he said. Okay. Good night. Good night, she said. He went back to his room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and through the bond she could feel him settling, properly this time, the way sleep settles on someone who has let something go. Not forgotten. Not resolved. Just placed somewhere it could be carried without being crushing. She went back to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about Lily Potter, who had been the first magical person in her family, who had been attentive to old and powerful things, who had written a letter to a son she might never see again and put into it everything she could think of that might help him. She thought, I'm going to make sure it matters. I'm going to make sure you didn't write it for nothing. She thought this with the absolute clarity of someone making a decision that isn't really a decision because there was never any other option, and she turned over, and through the bond she could feel Harry sleeping. The summer moved into September. Dumbledore came twice more, and true to his word he brought books, not all of them, not the whole truth, but more than before, and each time they pushed for more and each time he gave a little more ground. It was a negotiation. Hermione tracked it carefully. She thought Dumbledore was fundamentally honest and fundamentally unable to stop being the architect of everything, and the two of these qualities were in constant, visible conflict every time he sat in the drawing room and answered questions from 3 9-year-olds who had, between them, read approximately 800 pages of magical theory since his last visit. He brought a text about Horcrux theory on the second visit, reluctantly, in a plain brown wrapper. Hermione and Daphne spent 4 hours on it, and then sat down with Harry and mapped out what they understood. They made a list. Known or possible Horcruxes: the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, something Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw, the snake, and Harry himself. The last one they put on the list without comment, and Harry looked at it, and said, "We'll deal with that one," in the tone that meant he'd already privately dealt with it. The bond grew. That was the only word for it: grew, expanded, deepened, like something putting down roots. They knew each other's rhythms by November. Harry's thinking silences and Daphne's organizational focus and Hermione's tendency to read 3 books simultaneously. They practiced their magic, carefully, away from Ministry detection range, which Cyrus managed through a ward he maintained on the property. What they could do together, by the end of the year, was not the magic of 3 9-year-olds with no formal training. It was something more coherent and more purposeful than that, and it got bigger every time they tried. In December, Cyrus got a formal letter from the Wisengamot's Department of Minor Affairs, signed by 3 Wisengamot members, querying the guardianship arrangement. 2 of the signatories were affiliated with Lucius Malfoy. Cyrus responded with a 17-page document that referenced the Accord of Blood Right, the Gringotts standing of the Triad Bond, the endorsement of Albus Dumbledore, and 400 years of legal precedent. He sent it by owl, and then he poured himself a small glass of something amber from a decanter in his study, and went to bed. The Wisengamot did not respond. Harry watched this unfold with the attentiveness of someone learning how power actually worked, which was something he'd been doing all summer. He was learning that power was less often a fight and more often a negotiation, that the best moves were the ones that forced the other side to be the one who escalated, that the most important thing about a battle was usually the terrain. He was also learning Latin, which he hated, and Daphne's patience for his complaints about Latin had a very specific and finite limit. "Incanto," she said for the 3rd time. "Not incantus. The verb form. They sound the same." "They do not sound the same. They sound 90% the same. The 10% is the incantation, Harry." He looked at Hermione for support. Hermione did not look up from her book. "She's right," she said. "You're terrible friends," he said. "We're excellent friends," Daphne said. "Incanto. Incanto," Harry said, with the resignation of someone who will not win this particular battle. He said it correctly, and the small flame they'd been practicing with leaped 6 inches and went green for half a second. They all stared at it. "That's not. I didn't do that on purpose," Harry said. "No," Hermione said slowly. Was that the bond?" The flame was orange again. The smell of something old and warm and entirely not like a normal fire lingered for a few seconds. They looked at each other. "The bond," Daphne said quietly, with the expression she wore when she was assembling a conclusion she hadn't expected, "is getting stronger." "Yeah," Harry said, and he was almost smiling. "It is." Chapter 4. The Sorting of Storms. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and by 11:05 Harry had already had 3 different people stop outside their compartment door, look in, and walk away slightly faster than they'd arrived. The compartment was theirs, just the three of them, bags overhead, Hermione's books colonizing one entire side of the seat, Daphne's trunk packed with the particular precision of someone who believed organization was a moral virtue. Harry had the window seat without anyone discussing it, because the window seat was clearly his, in the way that some things between them had become clearly, and without negotiation, theirs. Outside, London dissolved into suburbs, then suburbs into open country, green and grey under a September sky. "They're going to stare," Hermione said, not looking up from Advanced Rune Theory, a first approach, which was technically a third-year text. "People stare," Harry said. "At you specifically," she said. "We've been over this." "The scar," he said. "The scar, the name, and the—" She paused. "Everything else." She meant the bond. She meant the way they moved together, which had become distinctive enough that people who knew what to look for would see it immediately. She meant the fact that 3 first years had arrived at platform 9 3/4 with an ease and a sureness that didn't belong to 11-year-olds who were new to this world. Because they weren't new to it. They'd spent 3 years making sure of that. The door slid open and a round-faced boy looked in with the expression of someone hoping for a friendly face and not being entirely sure he'd found one. Is this seat taken? Everywhere else is. Someone's frog got loose and it's a bit. Sit down," Harry said. He moved a bag. "I'm Harry. This is Hermione and Daphne." The round-faced boy sat with the grateful collapse of someone who has been on their feet longer than they'd like. "Neville Longbottom," he said. "Is there actually a frog loose in the other carriage? Because I had a frog and I know what that looks like and—" "Probably yes," Daphne said. Neville absorbed this. He looked at Harry with the expression that Hermione had come to recognize as people assembling the Harry Potter name in their head and checking it against the person in front of them. You're him, aren't you?" Neville said. "Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. A pause. "Sorry," Neville said. "My gran talks about you sometimes." "About the war." He looked like he regretted bringing it up already. "Sorry." I shouldn't have, it's fine," Harry said, and the ease with which he said it, the complete absence of discomfort or performance, was something Hermione appreciated about him. He'd had 3 years to decide how to hold his own name, and he'd decided to hold it lightly. "What about your parents? Were they in the war?" Neville stilled. "Yes," he said after a moment. "They were Aurors." A pause that had weight in it. "They were hurt," Neville said quietly. "After. They're at St. Mungo's. They've been there, my whole life." Nobody said "I'm sorry" in a way that filled the air with awkwardness. Harry looked at Neville directly and said, "That's a terrible thing to grow up with." Just that. Hermione felt through the bond the particular quality of Harry's attention when he was recognizing something in someone, the shaped resonance of "I know what it is to lose people in ways that don't have a clean ending." Neville looked slightly surprised to be seen that clearly by someone he'd known for 4 minutes. "Yeah," he said. "It is." "Your grandmother raised you?" Daphne said. "Gran? Yes. She's a lot." "I imagine she is," Daphne said, with something in her voice that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite amusement, and was exactly right. Neville looked at the 3 of them together. He looked at the way they were sitting, Harry at the window, Hermione and Daphne on the other side, and some quality of the space between all of them that Hermione knew people registered without knowing they were registering it. "Are you 3? He started. "Yes," Harry said. Neville nodded, apparently satisfied with this non-answer. "Right," he said, and asked Hermione what she was reading, and they talked about books for the rest of the journey, and by the time the countryside went purple and dark and someone came around with a trolley, Neville Longbottom had eaten 3 chocolate frogs and laughed genuinely twice and seemed to have forgotten that he'd been looking for somewhere to sit. Hogwarts arrived the way it always arrived in other people's descriptions, sudden, enormous, impossible, lit up against the night sky with the specific arrogance of a building that had been impressing people for 1,000 years and knew it. The first years crossed the lake in boats, and Hermione watched the castle grow larger with the part of her mind that wasn't busy cataloging the bioluminescence in the lake water and wondering what caused it. Harry was quiet beside her. Through the bond she felt something that was, not nervousness, not quite. Anticipation with edges. The feeling of approaching something you've been preparing for. Daphne was watching the castle with perfect composure, and the faintest trace of satisfaction, which on her face was equivalent to open enthusiasm. The boats docked. They walked up the steps. A tall, severe-looking witch in emerald robes met them, Professor McGonagall. Hermione had read extensively about her, and gave the speech about the Great Hall and the sorting and the 4 houses. Standing in the crowd of first years, Hermione registered the other children around them. A girl with red hair who kept trying to see past taller heads. A boy with dark, careful eyes. She read Blaise Zabini in his bearing before she knew she was doing it. 2 twins in the back who looked identically delighted by everything and could only be Weasleys. And to her left, very deliberately positioned, Draco Malfoy. He'd found them on the platform. Or rather, he'd found Harry, which meant he'd found all 3 of them, and the conversation had been, not unfriendly. That had been Hermione's first clear look at what 3 years had done to Draco Malfoy when held against whatever his father had been doing to him in the same period. He was sharper than she'd expected, more guarded than she'd expected, and just occasionally, when he forgot to perform the attitude, clearly, painfully lonely in a very particular way. He was standing 3 feet away now, looking at the great hall doors with his chin up and his shoulders in the posture his father wore. Harry caught her eye. She looked at Draco. Harry looked at Draco. Something passed between them through the bond that had no clear translation but felt approximately like, later. McGonagall led them into the great hall. The hall was, Hermione had read about it, of course. She'd read Hogwarts, a history twice, the annotated edition, and she knew about the enchanted ceiling and the house tables and the candles and the ghosts. Knowing about something and experiencing it were not the same thing, and the ceiling was doing something remarkable, showing a sky that was alive, clouds moving in real wind, stars behind them very deep and very clear, and even Hermione, who had read about it, stopped for half a second and looked up. Harry was looking at the staff table. Specifically at the slight figure in a purple turban who sat slightly apart from the other teachers, occasionally tilting his head at angles that felt slightly wrong. "Quirrell," Harry said under his breath. "I know," Daphne said, equally quiet. "He smells," Hermione said. Harry glanced at her. "Not literally," she said. "Or not only literally. The bond. Something about him feels wrong." The wrongness was subtle. It sat at the edge of the bond's awareness like a splinter you can feel but not quite locate, a low dissonance that started when they entered the hall and localized, eventually, on the defense against the dark arts professor with the stammer and the turban and the way he kept facing slightly away from everyone. "We handle it carefully," Daphne said. "Agreed," Harry said. "Not tonight." The sorting began. Hermione watched the sorting hat descend onto each first year and felt the collective nervous energy of the group around her, that communal anxiety of 11-year-olds about to be publicly categorized. She thought about what the hat would find in her, and found she wasn't particularly worried about it. She knew what she was. She'd known for 3 years, more clearly than she'd known anything. "Granger, Hermione." She walked to the stool. She sat down. The hat dropped over her eyes. "Well," said the hat, inside her head, in the voice of something very old that had seen a great deal and very rarely surprised. "That's unusual." "Hello," she thought back. "The bond," it said. "I've read about triads. Never sorted one." A pause, the pause of something riffling through possibilities with very old fingers. "Ravenclaw, clearly. The mind on you. I haven't seen a first year this widely read in, well. But there's something else. A will. A stubbornness." Another pause. "You'd do very well in Gryffindor." "I know," she said. "And yet you're asking me to keep the 3 of you together." She hadn't asked that explicitly. She'd thought it, very clearly, from the moment she'd sat down. She felt the bond at the edges of her awareness, Harry and Daphne both. Harry's sharp presence, Daphne's steady one. The three of you in the same house, the Hat said thoughtfully. Interesting. Not unprecedented, but interesting. The bond is old magic. It generally takes precedence. A beat. Still. I should point out that you'd all do quite well in separate houses. I know that too, she said. And you're still asking? Yes. Another beat. Then, you know, most students are worried about getting the right house. You're the first one this year to decide in advance what the right house is. There was something in the Hat's voice that was the vocal equivalent of a smile. Gryffindor, it said loudly enough for the hall. She went to the Gryffindor table and sat down between the red-haired twins, who introduced themselves as Fred and George before she'd fully settled, and she turned in her seat to watch. Potter, Harry. The hall went very quiet. Harry walked to the stool with his hands in his pockets and his face in the expression that meant absolutely nothing, which meant he was thinking very fast. He sat. The Hat dropped. She felt, through the bond, the Hat speaking to him. Not the words, just the shape of it, the quality of the conversation. She felt Harry hold something up, clearly, for the Hat to see. Felt the Hat's surprise. Then its assessment. Then something that felt like the Hat doing something it didn't entirely expect to do. Gryffindor. The Hat called, and the table erupted, and Harry crossed to sit beside Hermione, and he was almost smiling. What did it say? She murmured. It said I'd be good in all 4 houses, he said. I told it I wasn't interested in good, I was interested in right. Then it sorted me. What did you show it? You too, he said simply. She didn't have an answer to that. She turned to the front and waited. Greengrass, Daphne? The hall shifted. The name was known in certain parts of the wizarding world, and those parts were currently sitting at the Slytherin table. Daphne walked to the stool with the unhurried composure of someone in no particular hurry to perform anything for anyone. She sat. The Hat settled. It took longer with Daphne. Hermione could feel it. The conversation going back and forth, something pushing, something holding. She could feel Daphne's absolute stillness through the bond, that quality of her that was water over stone, perfectly clear and moving exactly where she chose to move. The hall was very quiet by the time the Hat opened its brim. Gryffindor. The Slytherin table made a sound. Daphne walked across the hall with her plate and her blue dress and her gray eyes looking at absolutely nothing in particular, and she sat down next to Harry, and the three of them were in a line at the Gryffindor table, and Hermione felt the bond settle into a completeness that was almost physical. A chord fully played. The Hat argued, Daphne said, under the noise of the next sorting. How long? Harry said. Long enough that I'm fairly certain it's going to write something in its records. A beat. It tried Slytherin 3 times. But, Hermione said. Daphne looked at her. Then at Harry. Then at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. But the bond is old magic, she said. And old magic, apparently, takes precedence. The great hall filled with food a few minutes later, and Neville found a seat at the Gryffindor table near them with the specific relief of someone who has been sorted somewhere, and found their only friends already there. He'd been put in Gryffindor mid-deliberation, the Hat apparently having decided between 2 options before landing. I thought it'd choose Hufflepuff, Neville said, helping himself to potatoes with the enthusiasm of someone who had been nervous for 4 hours and was now compensating. My Gran is going to be very pleased. My whole family's been Gryffindor. How do you feel about it? Harry said. Neville paused, a fork halfway to his mouth. Good, he said, then seemed surprised at his own certainty. Yeah. Actually, yeah, good. Good, Harry said. Down the table, Fred and George Weasley were conducting a spirited argument with their younger brother, a red-haired boy named Ron who had been sorted with some drama and had looked at Harry with an expression of very transparent awe before looking at Hermione and Daphne with more uncertainty. He tried to make conversation during the food and had aimed it primarily at Harry, which Harry had gently but consistently redirected to the general group, and Ron was still working out what to do with that. Are you really? Ron leaned across the table. Are the three of you really? He lowered his voice like it was a state secret. Triad bonded? Ron, Fred said. Where did you hear that? Daphne said. Ron's ears went red. My mom, she said. She heard it from someone who heard it from someone at the ministry. She said it was? He stopped. She said it was extraordinary. That's the word she used. Your mum's well informed, Harry said. She knows everything, Ron said, with the specific exhaustion of someone who had grown up with this as a permanent fact of life. Is it true that you can, feel what each other are doing? Emotionally? Essentially, Hermione said. Ron sat with this. He had a face that showed everything, which Hermione found immediately interesting because it was the opposite of Harry and Daphne. Does that get weird? We're used to it, Harry said. But you've only had it since 3 years, Harry said. Ron stared at him. You've been bonded since you were 8? 8, Daphne confirmed. Ron seemed to be recalibrating his entire picture of the situation. So all that time you've known about magic since you were 8? Both of you? He looked at Hermione. I knew I had magic since I was born, Hermione said. I just didn't have a name for it until I was 8. Right. Ron absorbed this. He looked at the three of them, and then he looked at the food on his plate, and then back at them. Can I ask one more thing? Go ahead, Harry said. What's it like? Being all three of you together like that. What does it actually feel like? A pause. It was not a question people usually asked directly, and it was not a question that had an easy answer. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Daphne. Daphne looked at her hands. Like knowing which direction is north, Daphne said finally. Even in the dark. Even when everything else is uncertain. Ron Weasley nodded slowly, like someone filing this away carefully. That's brilliant, he said, with simple sincerity. It is rather, Daphne agreed. The first problem made itself known 3 weeks in. It wasn't Quirrell, not yet. They were watching him, circling the problem from multiple angles, feeding Dumbledore carefully worded letters that pushed him toward the same conclusion without revealing that they'd already reached it. The first problem was smaller and more immediately irritating, which was that Professor Snape had developed an interest in Harry that was not, in any recognizable sense, pedagogical. The potions classroom was in the dungeons, and it smelled like things that had been combined with other things to interesting effect, and Snape moved through it with the deliberate ease of someone entirely at home in his expertise. He was, Hermione conceded, an extraordinary potions master. She could see it in the first lesson, the precision of his demonstration, the way he handled equipment, the knowledge behind every word he said. He was also, with approximately zero subtlety, determined to establish something about Harry. Potter, he said in the second class, standing over Harry's cauldron with his arms folded. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry looked up from his cauldron. His draft of the Living Death was already 3 steps further along than most of the class, because they'd spent a July afternoon at Greengrass House going through basic potions theory. Draft of Living Death, he said. A beat. And where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? A goat's stomach, Harry said. Snape's eyes moved fractionally. He'd clearly expected Harry to not know, and the not knowing would have been the opening move of something. He rerouted. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Also called aconite. The class was very quiet. Snape looked at Harry for a moment with an expression that was several things at once, none of them quite what Hermione expected, and then he said, 10 points from Gryffindor for not prefacing your answers with Professor. Harry blinked. Professor, he said, just slightly too late, and just slightly too precisely. They're the same plant. Hermione's cauldron bubbled. She kept her eyes on it. Daphne, across the aisle, was equally focused on her own work and radiating through the bond of very contained and very deliberate amusement. Snape moved away. They were leaving the class afterward when he stopped Harry with a word, just his name, quiet, the rest of the class filtering out. Daphne looked at Hermione. They stopped in the doorway without making a production of it. "Your mother," Snape said, and his voice was different. All the performance had gone out of it. "She was an extraordinary potion student. The best I've seen in 40 years of teaching." Harry looked at him. "I know," he said. "Dumbledore's told me some things about her." A pause. "She was my friend," Snape said. Before many things. I want you to understand that regardless of my manner in class, I am not your enemy." Harry held his gaze for a moment. "I know that too," he said. "But being not my enemy and taking points for answering questions correctly are two different things." Snape looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes that was quick and complicated. "Don't be insolent," he said, but there was no real heat in it. "I'll work on it," Harry said, and walked out, and Hermione fell into step beside him and Daphne fell into step on his other side, and behind them she heard Snape make a sound that might, in very different circumstances, have been something adjacent to a laugh. "He's complicated," Harry said. "Deeply," Hermione agreed. "I don't think he's a problem," Daphne said thoughtfully. "Not a threat. Just a complication. We have a lot of those," Harry said. "Building character," Daphne said. Quirrell was a different problem entirely. They began calling it the Quirrell situation between themselves because it needed a name, and by October they had enough information to form a working theory. The evidence, a smell that radiated from the man in waves, recognizable to all three of them through the bond as the particular quality of something dark and hungry, and not entirely one thing. An unusual pattern of absences, late nights, early mornings, the defense classroom locked at unpredictable hours. A tendency, when Harry was near, for the turban to shift slightly, like something underneath it was aware of him. Quirrell knew Harry was in the building. Whatever was sharing space with him knew it too. "Voldemort," Harry said on a Thursday evening in November. They were in one of the smaller study rooms off the library, which they'd claimed by the simple method of being in it so often that other students had stopped trying to use it. "He's on the back of his head." Hermione had her notes out. "That tracks with the Horcrux theory," she said. "Not a Horcrux, he's too diminished for that. More like a parasite. Using Quirrell as a host." "What does he want?" Daphne said. She was sitting cross-legged on the chair, which was the only undignified physical position Hermione had ever seen her in, and which she seemed to allow herself only when they were entirely alone. "At Hogwarts specifically." "The stone," Harry said. They looked at him. "I'd been thinking about it," he said. "Dumbledore moved something from a Gringotts vault in July. It was in the Prophet, a break-in at Gringotts, Vault 713, the day we went to Diagon Alley. But when we were there, Hookfong mentioned a secure transfer to a third-party facility. The timing, he moved it here," Hermione said slowly. "To Hogwarts. The protection's under the trapdoor on the third-floor corridor," Daphne said. "We've walked past the door. You can feel something behind it through the bond if you're paying attention." "I've been paying attention," Harry confirmed. Hermione looked at her notes. "A philosopher's stone," she said. "If Voldemort gets access to a stone, he gets a body," Harry said. "A real one. And Quirrell's going to try and get it for him." They sat with this for a moment. The library was quiet around them, the distant sound of rain against the windows, someone's dropped books 2 rooms over. "We tell Dumbledore," Hermione said. "Clearly and directly, not in carefully worded letters. We tell him what we know. He won't be surprised," Daphne said. "I know," Hermione said. "But I want him to know that we know. I want that on the record." "And the stone itself?" Harry said. "We need to know what's under that trapdoor," Daphne said. "Not to take the stone. Just to understand the shape of the problem." You want to go down there? Harry said. I want to know what's down there, she said. There's a difference. There's a very small difference, Hermione said. Daphne's mouth curved. Are we going or not? They went on a Friday night in late November, after curfew, under Harry's invisibility cloak, which had arrived by owl in October with a note from Dumbledore that said only your father would have wanted you to have this, and which was large enough for 3 people if they were careful about it. The third-floor corridor was dark and smelled like dog. Big dog, Harry said, lifting the trapdoor. The sound from below was rhythmic and enormous, breathing, 3 separate breathing rhythms, which resolved as their eyes adjusted into the most improbable thing Hermione had seen since she'd walked into Petunia Dursley's hallway. That's a Cerberus, she said. It's asleep, Daphne said. Because it's listening to that. Below the sleeping Cerberus, a faint music, barely audible, drifted from somewhere. A small enchanted harp, one string going occasionally out of tune. Whoever set this up, Harry said, was not expecting anyone to figure out the music trick. It's not meant to be a challenge, Hermione said. It's meant to be a deterrent. The real protections are below. They lowered the trapdoor carefully. They were not going down. Not tonight. Tonight was reconnaissance, triangulating what they knew with what they could determine from above. Below the Cerberus, Devil's Snare, almost certainly, given the root tendrils visible at the edges. Then something else, she could feel the layers of it, distinct and intentional, each one keyed to a different skill. Who designed this? Harry said. Multiple professors, Daphne said. I can identify Flitwick's work, the harmonic signature in the 3rd layer down. And something that feels like McGonagall. Snape contributed something, Hermione said. Logic puzzle, probably. His mind works in sequences. Harry lowered the trapdoor again fully. The Cerberus's breathing kept its rhythm. We're not going down, he said, and it wasn't quite a question. Not yet, Daphne said. Not unless we have to. We tell Dumbledore, Hermione said again. Everything. The full picture. And we make him move the stone. He won't, Harry said. He will, Hermione said. If the alternative is us going down there ourselves. She let that sit. Then, I'm not threatening. I'm explaining our position. The stone is here, Voldemort is here in Quirrell's head, and either Dumbledore moves the stone or the risk increases. He's rational enough to see that. Harry looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant he was deciding whether to argue and concluding it wasn't worth it. You're very scary sometimes. Thank you, Hermione said, and meant it. Dumbledore moved the stone in December. He arrived on a Tuesday, had a 20-minute conversation with all 3 of them in McGonagall's office, McGonagall present throughout, her expression doing something complicated between proud and deeply unsettled, and he confirmed the stone's presence, confirmed his awareness of Quirrell, and then listened while Harry, Hermione, and Daphne laid out the full picture with the precision of people who had been assembling it for 3 months. When they finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. You've been investigating this since September, he said. Since before September, Harry said. We identified Quirrell on the train. Another quiet moment. McGonagall made a small, controlled sound. The stone, Dumbledore said carefully, is here partly as bait. We know, Daphne said. You wanted Voldemort to come to you. Controlled conditions, familiar ground. A pause. It's a reasonable plan. It's also a plan that involves 11-year-olds living in the same building as a possessed teacher. I was monitoring, so were we, Harry said. And we found more in 3 months then. He stopped. He looked at his hands. When he looked up, his voice was level. Move the stone. Deal with Quirrell separately here, without the stone as the object. Remove the thing he needs and he becomes a different kind of problem. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. You're not wrong, he said quietly. He said it like a man who had considered the same conclusion from a different angle and arrived at it more slowly and was not entirely comfortable with the fact that 3 first years had beaten him to it. The stone was moved in the last week of term. Quirrell, deprived of his objective, became increasingly erratic through January and February. They watched him the way you watch something that hasn't realized it's been defused, careful and patient. By March his health had visibly deteriorated, the dark parasite consuming him faster without a goal to focus toward. He was gone by the Easter holiday. Sick leave, the notice said. He didn't come back. A new teacher arrived in April, a brisk, practical woman named Burbage who taught defense with both competence and a cheerful disregard for the previous professor's curriculum, which had been, Hermione noted, almost aggressively unhelpful. The school moved on. It was a Wednesday in May, late afternoon, when Neville found them in the courtyard and sat down without being invited, which was something he'd stopped asking permission for around December. "I did it," he said. Harry looked up from his transfiguration notes. "Did what?" "The switching spell." Neville's face had the slightly stunned quality of someone who has proved themselves right about something they'd half given up on. "McGonagall was," she said, "well done?" "She actually said well done to me." "She says well done when you've done well," Daphne said, setting down her book. "That's consistent." "She doesn't say it to me usually," Neville said. "You've been getting better every week," Harry said. "We've been watching." Neville looked at him. "You've been watching?" "Not in a strange way," Hermione said. "In the way of noticing. You were struggling in October, and you're not struggling now." "I still struggle," Neville said. "Everyone struggles with things," Harry said. "You're better." Neville sat with this in the particular way he had of receiving compliments, initially defensive, then, as the sincerity of it registered, quietly pleased. He pulled at the grass beside the courtyard bench. "My dad was brilliant at transfiguration," he said to the grass. "Gran says. She says I've got my mum's potions instincts, not my dad's." A pause. "I used to think she meant that as a criticism. I'm starting to think she might just mean it as a fact." "Your mum is extraordinary at potions," Daphne said. "Her work before, she published 2 papers in Healer's Quarterly. I've read them." Neville looked up. "You've read my mum's papers?" "She had genuinely novel approaches to magical pain mediation," Daphne said, as though this were entirely normal. "The theory work in her second paper was ahead of its time." Neville's face did something unguarded and vast, and then he pulled it back to a more manageable size, and he said, very quietly, "I'll tell her next time I visit. She might not understand. But I'll tell her." "Tell her," Harry said. They sat in the courtyard in the May sun, the 4 of them, the year almost done around them. The castle looked different now than it had in September. Not different, exactly, but familiar in a way it hadn't been then, which was its own kind of different. Hermione had her name in 17 library books. Harry had beaten the Slytherin Quidditch team so comprehensively in March that the memory of it still produced a warm satisfaction through the bond. Daphne had corrected a transfiguration professor in front of the class, politely, accurately, unapologetically, and the professor had thanked her, and it hadn't even been a tense moment, which Hermione thought said something important about what they'd built here. They weren't hiding. They weren't performing. They weren't waiting for permission to take up space. "Next year's going to be different," Harry said, to no one in particular. Hermione looked at him. "Different how?" "I don't know," he said. "I can feel it. Through the bond. Something's shifting." He looked at Daphne. "Second year," Daphne said. "Yes. I feel it too." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the castle walls. "Something's waking up." Hermione thought about the list they'd made 2 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table in Greengrass house. The Horcruxes and their locations, the theory and the guesswork. The long shape of the thing that was coming. She thought about a girl who had walked 4 miles on a Tuesday morning and a girl who had followed a pull across 20 minutes of Surrey and a boy in a cupboard with his knees pulled to his chest. "Good," she said. "Let it wake up." The bond ran warm between them in the afternoon light, and the castle stood behind them, ancient and full of rooms they hadn't been to yet. Chapter 5 What Hunts in the Dark. The Chamber of Secrets opened on a Thursday. They knew it before anyone told them, the way they knew most things now, through the bond, that persistent awareness that had grown so specific over 3 years that it could distinguish between ordinary wrongness and the particular wrongness of something old and dark waking up beneath their feet. Harry woke up at 2 in the morning in October of second year with the bond pulled taut between the three of them like a wire under tension, and he was dressed and in the corridor outside Hermione's dormitory before she'd finished lacing her shoes. Daphne was already on the stairs. "Below," Harry said. "How far below?" Daphne said. "Far," Hermione said. She had her notes. She always had her notes, a habit so ingrained it had ceased to be deliberate, and she was already moving through them in her head, everything she'd read over the summer about Hogwarts foundations. "The school goes down 5 levels below the main dungeons. There are chambers marked on the original founder's plans that aren't on any current map." "You've seen the original plans," Harry said. "Dumbledore let me into the restricted archive in July," Hermione said. "I may have made copies." They were moving through the corridors, quick and quiet, the castle dark and breathing around them. Harry had the invisibility cloak bunched in one hand, not over them yet, just carried, available. His other hand was close to his side in a way that Hermione recognized as ready, the particular readiness he'd developed over 2 years of intensive magical training that sat in his body now like a natural posture. The wrongness was stronger near the dungeons. It wasn't the smell exactly. They'd come to know the quality of dark magic by now, the specific texture of it through the bond, and what was coming up from below was old. Very old. The kind of old that had nothing to apologize for. "The message on the wall," Daphne said. They'd seen it at dinner and pretended not to notice the precise way other students had noticed it. Read on gray stone, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Mrs. Norris had been found petrified near the scene, and Filch had been inconsolable in a way that Hermione had found unexpectedly affecting. "Someone opened it," Harry said. "Not something. Someone with access to the school." "Ginny Weasley," Daphne said. They both looked at her. "She's been not herself," Daphne said carefully. "Since September. I watched people. She's been writing constantly, that diary, and the more she writes the less present she seems." A pause. "I think the diary is one of them." The Horcrux list. The diary, the very first item. T.M. Riddle's diary, date unknown, suspected to be an early creation. "Someone put it in her possession," Harry said. His voice had gone very flat. "Deliberately," Hermione said. "As a weapon." "Malfoy," Harry said. It wasn't accusatory, it was the voice of someone completing an equation. "At Diagon Alley. He was near the Weasleys. He and Ginny's father had a confrontation." "Lucius," Daphne said. She said her father's associate's name with a precision that had nothing warm in it. "He's been patient for a year. He decided to move." She was quiet for a moment. "He didn't expect us to know about Horcruxes. He thought he was deploying a weapon that only Voldemort's inner circle would recognize." They'd reached the entrance to the lower dungeons. The wrongness was definite now, a directional pull, like magnetic north but going down. "The chamber," Harry said. "Tonight? We need to find where the entrance is first," Hermione said. "And we need Ginny." "She's in the castle," Daphne said. "I felt it when we left the tower." "Not quite. Not all the way gone, not yet." "Then we move," Harry said. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was in a bathroom on the 2nd floor, which Hermione would have found anticlimactic if everything about its discovery hadn't been so distinctly unpleasant. The bathroom belonged to a ghost, Moaning Myrtle, who had been dead for 50 years and maintained an occupancy with the combination of squatter's rights and a complete lack of anyone willing to argue with her. The ghost was, when they arrived, in a state of high excitement, which meant she was crying loudly and gesturing dramatically at the sinks. "Something came through," she wailed. "Down there. Something terrible and enormous, and it came right past me. Which is very rude. Nobody ever considers my feelings, Myrtle," Harry said, cutting through the wailing with the practiced directness of someone who'd learned that Myrtle responded to being addressed more than to being commiserated with. "Which sink?" Myrtle blinked at him. Then she pointed. The sink had a snake engraved on the tap. Hermione looked at it, and looked at Harry. "Parseltongue," she said. "Yes," he said, and looked at the snake, and said something that wasn't English. The language slid out of him the way it always had, without effort or decision, that particular ability that still occasionally startled even him. The sink moved. The floor opened. The pipe was enormous and dark and dropped steeply. They looked at it. "Down," Daphne said. "We're going to fall a long way," Hermione said. "Yes," Daphne agreed. Harry went first. Hermione followed, and then Daphne, and the fall was long and dark and surprisingly fast, and they landed in something damp at the bottom that Hermione chose not to examine too closely in the limited wan light. Myrtle's voice floated down the pipe behind them. "If you die down there, you can share my bathroom." "Encouraging," Daphne said, brushing something off her sleeve. The chamber was exactly what a chamber built by Salazar Slytherin in the 10th century to house a weapon ought to be: long, cold, theatrically dark, with stone serpents on every surface and the particular acoustics of a room designed for a single occupant. Their wan light moved across pillars and carved scales and water on the floor that reflected the light upward, and Hermione mapped it as they moved: exits, sight lines, ceiling height. They found Ginny Weasley 50 feet in, crumpled at the base of a pillar. Harry got there first, and dropped to a knee beside her, 2 fingers to her throat. "Pulse," he said immediately. "She's cold, but she's here." Hermione crouched on Ginny's other side. The girl was pale and still, her red hair spread out on the wet stone, and the diary, that diary, black and important and humming with something that made the bond recoil, lay open beside her hand. "Don't touch it," Daphne said sharply. She was standing back, wand out, her eyes not on Ginny but on the shadows at the far end of the chamber. "I wasn't going to," Hermione said. "Something else is here," Daphne said. They all felt it then, a wrongness with a location, a dark and enormously old presence in the deep shadows at the chamber's far end. The bond went very still between them, the specific stillness that preceded something requiring their full attention. "The basilisk," Harry said quietly. "Don't look at it directly," Hermione said immediately. She already had her eyes angled at the floor. "The gaze kills. Indirect reflection is okay, indirect gaze is petrification, not death." "How do you know the difference?" Harry said, also looking at the floor. "I've been researching basilisks since October," Hermione said. "I suspected this was the direction we were heading." She pulled from her pocket, because of course she had it, prepared 3 days ago when the bond first started tugging towards something old and serpentine, a small mirror. "Reflection. Watch its movements through the mirror." "You planned this," Harry said. "Contingency planning," Hermione said. "Daphne and I discussed it." "You didn't tell me." "You'd have wanted to go find the basilisk immediately," Daphne said, still watching the shadows. "We needed more information first." Harry was quiet for half a second. "Fair," he said. Then, through the bond, she felt his focus sharpen, the particular shift of him going from reactive to purposeful, the mode she'd privately thought of as Harry deciding the outcome. "The basilisk responds to Parseltongue. It responds to the heir of Slytherin," Hermione said. "But Parseltongue is how Slytherin commanded it. It might work." "It will work," Harry said. "You don't know that." "I'm going to make it work," he said, which was not the same thing but was, in her experience, often just as effective. He stood up. He faced the darkness at the far end of the chamber. He spoke. The language came out of him like water, low, continuous, sibilant. Hermione kept her mirror angled, watching the moving shadows at the far end, and the moving shadows stopped. Then there was a sound, enormous, slow, like a building deciding whether to stand or fall, and the basilisk came forward. It was very large. Even in the mirror it was arresting, 60 feet at least of iridescent scale and terrible purpose, the most dangerous magical creature in Britain moving toward an 11-year-old boy who was speaking to it in its language and not moving an inch. Hermione held the mirror steady. Daphne was very still beside her, wand tracking the creature's movement, her breathing controlled and even. Harry was still talking. The basilisk slowed, then stopped. The bond was enormous. It had a size in moments like these that it didn't have in ordinary moments, all three of them aligned and present, and radiating the same intention, and whatever the ancient magic was that had formed them, it was awake and paying attention. "It's going to answer me," Harry said in English, without moving his eyes from the far end. "It's been down here a long time. It's angry. Not at me. At the situation. Can you tell it to stand down?" Daphne said. Harry spoke again. The basilisk moved, and for a moment the mirror showed Hermione a close-up of scales and old, terrible eyes angled slightly away. It was listening, she realized. Not obeying, exactly. Listening. "It says," Harry said, and his voice had a quality in it she rarely heard, "that it has been waiting for someone to speak to it since the heir last came. That the girl was a poor vessel for the heir's commands. That it would rather not." A pause, while something passed between Harry and 60 feet of ancient serpent in a language older than the school. "Continue. Continue existing?" Hermione said. "Continue being a weapon," Harry said. "It's very old. It wants—" He stopped. "It wants to stop." The chamber was very quiet. Daphne said carefully, "Can you tell it that helping us tonight means it doesn't have to be a weapon anymore?" Harry spoke. A long, slow response came back from the darkness, the sound of something vast and considered. Harry was quiet for a moment, processing. "It wants a promise," he said. "From the heir." "Are you the heir?" Hermione said. "Not Slytherin's." "But it doesn't. It seems to think the bond constitutes something equivalent." He paused. "It recognizes the ancient magic." Of course it did. The bond was older than Hogwarts. A creature this ancient would feel it the way water felt a current. "Promise it," Daphne said. Harry turned back to the darkness and spoke, and the sound that came back was the sound of something enormous settling into stillness, and then silence. The presence at the end of the chamber diminished, not gone but dormant. Retreated. Hermione lowered her mirror. "It's going to sleep," Harry said. "It said—" He paused, and something moved in his expression that she recognized as him trying to translate something that didn't translate. Something like "at last." Nobody said anything for a moment. "All right," Hermione said finally. She turned to Ginny. "Now we deal with the diary." The diary was, as Dumbledore's text had described Horcruxes, a vessel. A container for a piece of something that had no business being in pieces. Even from 3 feet away the bond registered it as profoundly wrong, not the wrongness of dark magic generally, but a specific brackish wrongness, the feeling of something that should be unified being violently separated. They stood around it with the caution of people looking at something that had already done considerable damage. "The piece inside it is 16-year-old Tom Riddle," Hermione said. "The version that possessed Ginny was a memory, an imprint. But the soul fragment underneath that is real. Can we destroy it here?" Daphne said. "We need basilisk venom," Hermione said. "Which we have, technically, in the chamber." "You want to use a fong," Harry said. "It's the most reliably destructive substance for a Horcrux," Hermione said. "The venom corrodes magical constructs at the foundational level." Can we get a fong without waking the basilisk?" Daphne said. "I'll ask," Harry said, and turned and spoke to the darkness, and after a pause something slid across the stone floor, a single fong, enormous, white, still faintly gleaming with residual venom. "That was very helpful of it," Hermione said. "I think it's happy to be useful in a way that doesn't require hurting anyone," Harry said. Hermione took the fong with a careful levitation charm, keeping it at arm's length. She positioned it over the diary. She looked at Harry, then Daphne. Together, Daphne said. The magic that drove the Fong through the diary was not any individual spell. It was the bond, all three of them directing the same intention through the Fong through Hermione's levitation charm, and when it struck the cover the diary screamed. Not metaphorically. A sound came out of it that was almost human and entirely wrong, long and high and receding, and black ink spread out from the puncture like a wound, and Tom Riddle's 16-year-old handwriting bled across the cover and soaked into the stone, and then was still. The diary was a diary. Just a diary. Ginny Weasley made a sound. They were at her side immediately. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then finding the ceiling, then finding Harry's face. Where? She started. The chamber, Harry said. Under the school. You're all right? She looked at him. Her eyes were filling. I couldn't stop. There was a voice and I couldn't. I know, Harry said. He said it the way he said it to Neville sometimes, the particular gentleness of someone who genuinely knew. You were used. That's not the same as doing it. Ginny Weasley looked at Harry Potter on the floor of the Chamber of Secrets and burst into tears, which he sat through with the patient grace of someone who had learned that sometimes tears needed sitting through, and Hermione and Daphne exchanged a glance over Ginny's head that said, without words, we'll discuss how she got the diary later, and what that means about Lucius Malfoy. Getting out was easier than getting in. Harry spoke to the chamber, and a section of wall at the far end opened, a different passage, carved stone steps going up at a manageable angle, eventually emerging into the first-floor corridor through a concealed panel near the trophy room. They came out at 4 a.m. to find Professor McGonagall waiting. She had the expression of someone who has spent several hours managing a crisis with insufficient information and has just received the information and is now recalibrating her entire evening. She looked at them. At Ginny, who was wrapped in Harry's robes. At the state of their clothes. At the basilisk Fong, which Hermione was still levitating because it seemed unwise to put it down in a corridor. My office, McGonagall said. Now. The basilisk is contained, Daphne said. My office, McGonagall said again, with slightly more weight on both words. The debrief took 2 hours. Dumbledore arrived at 4:30, still in his nightclothes under his robes, which was the only time Hermione had ever seen him look remotely disheveled. McGonagall made tea with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that tea was structural in moments like this. They explained everything. The diary, the Horcrux, Ginny's possession, the basilisk, the promise Harry had made. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which was something she noticed he did now, with them. He'd learned in 2 years that interrupting them lost him information. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. The basilisk, he said finally. Sleeping, Harry said. It'll stay sleeping. It gave us its word. You took the word of a basilisk. It's 800 years old, Harry said. It's been a weapon its entire existence. It kept its word to Slytherin for 5 centuries. I think it can keep its word to me. Dumbledore looked at him. Then he said, with a care that wasn't quite delicacy. The Fong. The diary. You destroyed it. Yes, Hermione said. And you knew it was a Horcrux. We've known since July, Daphne said. We found references to your archive notes. The theoretical work on soul division. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment in a way that was specifically the quiet of someone choosing between several responses. I had hoped to handle the Horcruxes, we know, Harry said. You had a plan. We've discussed your plan. We've discussed the part where your plan requires us to be unaware of things that directly concern us. He said it without heat, just factually. We're not doing that. Harry, Dumbledore said. Some of what I've kept from you, the prophecy says either can live while the other survives. Harry said. I know. I've known since you told me 3 years ago. You thought not knowing would, what? Make it easier? The office was very still. McGonagall's tea cooled in front of her. Ginny, exhausted and pale in the corner armchair, had stopped following the conversation with full attention and was hovering somewhere near sleep. "I thought," Dumbledore said slowly, "that knowing too early would change you. That the weight of it would crush me." Harry said. "Like being in a cupboard for 8 years was supposed to make me humble." He said it without bitterness. Just accuracy. "With respect, I'm not trying to be cruel. I don't think you've ever had to trust someone else's resilience before. You've always been the one doing the protecting. It's hard to let other people carry weight when you're used to carrying everything." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. Then, and this was the thing Hermione would remember longest about this morning, Albus Dumbledore, old and extraordinary and wrong in specific ways he was slowly learning, said, "You're right. I'm sorry." The office was very still. Harry nodded. "One down," he said. 6 to go. The school found out by Friday, which was inevitable. A school full of 12-year-olds was not a sealed environment, and by the time Saturday morning arrived, the story had been told in approximately 40 different versions, ranging from the mostly accurate to the enthusiastically fictional. The mostly accurate version held that Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Daphne Greengrass had gone into the Chamber of Secrets, destroyed a Horcrux, retrieved the petrified then recovered Ginny Weasley, and negotiated a truce with a basilisk. The enthusiastically fictional version involved considerably more dragons. Neville found them at breakfast with the expression he wore when he had something important to say and was figuring out how. He sat down, accepted the toast Hermione offered him, and said, "You went down there at 2 in the morning." "Yes," Harry said. "Without telling me." A pause. Harry looked at him. "It was fast-moving," he said. "We didn't have time to, I know," Neville said. I know. I just..." He put down the toast. "I want to help. When things like this happen. I know I'm not you three. I know the bond means you work together in a way I can't be part of. But I want to help." Something passed through the bond, not a decision, exactly, but a mutual leaning in the same direction. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Daphne. Daphne was already looking at Neville with the expression she wore when she'd been thinking about something longer than the conversation suggested. "The Horcrux hunt," Harry said carefully. "I know about Horcruxes," Neville said. "I've been reading the books you've had from Dumbledore. You left them in the common room and I..." He stopped. "Sorry. I shouldn't have. You read them?" Hermione said. "Most of them. The theory's brilliant and terrible. The soul division magic." He shuddered slightly. "But if there are more of them out there and you're going to find them, then you're going to need more people who know what they're looking for." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "It's dangerous," he said. "I know," Neville said. "More dangerous than the chamber. I understood that from the books, yes. Your grandmother would want me to fight for the people who deserve fighting for," Neville said, and his voice was very quiet and completely certain. "My parents did." The bond was warm between them. It couldn't include Neville. It was sealed. It was 3. It was what it was. But Hermione thought the bond recognized him in some way, recognized the quality of a person who was genuinely, and without agenda, offering themselves. "All right," Harry said. "You're in." Neville's face did the thing it did when he was pleased and hadn't entirely expected to be. He turned to his breakfast with concentrated focus. "He's going to be terrifying by the time he's 17, Daphne said, just loud enough. "I can hear you," Neville said. "I know," Daphne said. The Malfoy conversation happened on a Sunday. Draco had been watching them since the beginning of the year with the expression of someone doing continuous, uncomfortable math. He was not his father's ally in this. Hermione had been watching him carefully, the same way she watched everything, and what she saw was a boy in the slow process of discovering that several things he'd been told were wrong and deciding what to do about it. He found Harry in the library, alone for once. Daphne and Hermione were in a free study period on the other side of the building, present through the bond but not physically nearby. "Potter," Draco said. Harry looked up from the annotated history of dark object creation, which was not technically on any approved reading list. Malfoy. Draco sat down across from him, which was a statement in itself. He had the posture his father wore, and his mother's eyes, and the expression of someone who has rehearsed this conversation and abandoned the rehearsal, and is now proceeding without a script. "The diary," Draco said. "My father gave it to the Weasley girl." "Yes," Harry said. "He told me, before the year, he told me to stay away from Ginny Weasley." He said it with the flat precision of someone translating their own history into something uglier. "I thought he just meant socially. Blood status." A pause. "He knew what was in it." "Yes," Harry said again. Draco's hands were flat on the table. "He could have killed her. If the Horcrux had taken full possession, yes," Harry said. "She would have been blamed for whatever the basilisk did. Then disposed of." Draco looked at his hands. "He would say he had reasons. He'd have an argument for it. He always has an argument." He stopped. "I know what he is. I've known for a while. It's hard to know what to do with it," Harry said. "Yes." A pause. "You don't hate me for it. You didn't do it," Harry said. "He's my father. I know what it is to have people who are supposed to protect you do things that hurt you," Harry said. "The sin isn't yours." Draco looked at him with the expression of someone finding solid ground slightly unexpectedly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," he said. "He'll find out that you destroyed it. He'll think I told you." "Did you?" "No. But that won't matter." Harry looked at him steadily. "Draco," he said, "you have a choice. Not an easy one. But you have it." He paused. "What do you want?" A silence that had a lot in it. "I want to not be him," Draco said quietly. "Then start there," Harry said. "That's enough to start." Draco stood. He looked at Harry's book, then at Harry. "There are more," he said. "Horcruxes. I heard my father and Aunt Bellatrix talking. She has one. Kept in her vault." Harry looked at him. "Lestrange vault, Gringotts," Draco said. "I don't know what it is. A cup, I think." He left without waiting for a response. Harry watched him go. Through the bond, Hermione felt the shape of it from across the building, felt Harry's assessment, careful and honest, of the encounter. Felt him turn something over and land on a conclusion. She sent back a feeling that was wordless but translated approximately to, "I agree." His response through the bond was something like, "He's not his father." She responded, "No. He isn't." The Lestrange vault information changed the shape of the hunt. They had the diary destroyed. The ring, suspected location in the Gaunt Shack in Little Hangleton. The locket, suspected location unknown. The cup in Lestrange vault. Something Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw, location unknown. The snake. And Harry himself, which remained the part of the list none of them discussed directly for long. Dumbledore, when presented with the new information, went very still for a long moment. "You got that from Draco Malfoy?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. "He volunteered it." "Yes." Dumbledore was quiet. "His father is going to realize, yes," Harry said. "We know. We're going to need to move on the Lestrange vault before Lucius Malfoy realizes what his son did. How fast can you arrange Gringotts access?" "Arranging access to another family's vault is not," Dumbledore started. "If we can demonstrate that the vault contains a stolen dark object constituting a soul fragment," Daphne said, "Gringotts will have independent grounds to investigate." Under the Accord of Blood Right. Dumbledore looked at her. "How do you know the Accord of Hookfang told us when we were 9? Hermione said. "We looked it up afterward." Dumbledore sat back in his chair, and for a moment he looked his age, old and very aware of it, not in a diminished way but in the way of someone who has seen a great deal and is now watching the next generation move faster than he expected and finding it disorienting and right all at the same time. "Give me a week," he said. "I'll arrange a formal object inspection request through the ministry. If we frame it correctly, we need to be there," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. "We're not sitting in the castle while you go to Gringotts," Harry said. "This is our hunt. We've been building toward it for 3 years. We go with you." A long pause. "You're 12," Dumbledore said. "Nearly 13," Daphne said. "The distinction is not as significant as you seem to believe. We're triad bonded," Hermione said. "Our magical standing is adult equivalent for the purposes of Gringotts proceedings. It's in the Accord." She met his eyes. "We've read the Accord. All of it." Dumbledore looked between the three of them. He looked at the bond. She could see him reading it the way he sometimes did, that sensitivity he had to magical signatures tracking what the three of them were to each other. "All right," he said, which in 2 years had become the thing he said when he ran out of counter-arguments and decided resistance was genuinely inadvisable. "Thank you," Hermione said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just be careful." "We're always careful," Harry said. "That is," Dumbledore said, "the least accurate thing I have heard all year." The Lestrange vault was cold and full of gold, and the cup was exactly where Draco said it would be. The Gringotts inspection team, 7 goblins in formal attire, including Hook Fong and an account manager named Razorclaw who had the energy of someone who had been waiting for a reason to investigate this vault for some time, located the cup in the 3rd quarter of the vault and confirmed, via their own magical instruments, that it contained a soul fragment of a dark wizard. Hook Fong looked at the three of them during the confirmation process with the flat professional expression that Hermione had learned to read as extremely satisfied. The cup went into a containment vessel. The Lestrange family account was flagged. Papers were filed. Bellatrix Lestrange, currently in Azkaban, would be notified through ministry channels. Harry watched the cup sealed into its container and said very quietly, Two, Hermione agreed. The ring. The locket. Nagini. Whatever Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff artifact remained. And the one they didn't say. 5 remaining. But the shape of the hunt was clearer now. They had information, they had allies, they had Draco Malfoy on the edges of something that might become actual trust. They had Neville, who had spent the 2 weeks since his conversation with Harry reading everything they put in front of him with the intense focus of someone who has found his purpose. They had Dumbledore, increasingly less architect and increasingly more partner. They had each other. The bond ran between them in the cold air of Gringotts' lower levels, warm and constant and growing, always growing, old magic putting down roots in 3 people who had chosen it without knowing what they were choosing, back in a hallway in Surrey when they were 8 years old and the world was very loud with light. Hermione thought, we're going to finish this. She thought it with the absolute, unflappable certainty of someone who has looked at the shape of what's ahead and decided not to be afraid of it. Not because fear was wrong or weakness was shameful, but because the fear was smaller than the thing she was moving toward, and always had been. Daphne caught her eye across the vault. I know, the bond said, from Daphne's direction. Clear as a voice. Harry, between them, was already walking toward the exit. Chapter 6. The Compact declared the Wisengamot convened on the 14th of June in a chamber 60 feet underground that smelled like old parchment and older decisions, and it was packed. Every seat in the tiered gallery was filled. Purple-robed Wisengamot members occupied the curved benches in careful order of seniority, their hats bobbing with the small, contained movements of people performing dignity. The public gallery above held reporters, ministry officials, and a selection of interested parties whose interest was of the kind that preferred not to announce itself. The Minister for Magic, a small, blustering man named Cornelius Fudge who wore a bowler hat indoors, which told you most of what you needed to know, sat in the presiding chair with the expression of someone who had agreed to chair the session without being told what would actually happen in it. Harry, Hermione, and Daphne stood on the floor of the chamber and waited. They were 13 years old. They were wearing their school robes because Dumbledore had suggested formal dress and school robes were the most formal thing they owned and none of them had considered this a problem. Hermione had her hair pulled back in the way she wore it for exams. Daphne had her plait. Harry had done nothing at all to his hair, which looked the same as it always looked, which was to say, making its own decisions. Around them, the chamber noise was considerable. Several Wisengamot members were consulting parchments. Several others were consulting each other in undertones. Lucius Malfoy was in the third row of the gallery, very still in excellent grey robes, watching the floor with an expression of composed attention that told Hermione he'd had 3 months to prepare for this and had used every minute of them. She'd had 3 months too. "Fudge looks ill," Harry said very quietly. "He's been Lucius's man for years," Daphne said, equally quiet. "He didn't expect us to request a full session. He expected a closed inquiry. He underestimated Dumbledore's willingness to make this public," Hermione said. "He underestimated a lot of things," Harry said. The doors at the far end opened. Dumbledore entered in deep blue robes with silver stars, which under any other circumstances Hermione would have found whimsical, but which today had the quality of a flag being planted. He was followed by Cyrus Greengrass, who had been their legal representative since the guardianship filing 3 years ago and who moved through the chamber with the unhurried ease of someone who had been in this room many times and found it approximately as impressive as he found most things, which was not very. Behind Cyrus, Neville Longbottom, who was present as a material witness and who was trying very hard not to look like he was terrified, and largely succeeding. And behind Neville, walking in last with the deliberate timing of a woman who understood the value of an entrance, Augusta Longbottom, Neville's grandmother, in a formidable hat. She had been briefed in April. She had listened in silence, asked 7 very pointed questions, and then said, "Good. It's about time someone with sense took hold of this situation." She'd been Neville's most vocal supporter since, and her presence in the chamber today was a political statement, as clear as anything written on parchment. Fudge called the session to order with the specific desperation of a man trying to control something he no longer understood. The session had been called on 4 counts. First, the formal recognition of the triad bond under Wisengamot law, with associated rights and standing for its members. This was procedural and relatively uncontested. The Accord of Bloodright was 400 years old and entirely clear on the matter, and Gringotts had already recognized the bond independently, which meant arguing against it would constitute arguing with the goblins, which no one wanted to do. Second, the formal investigation of Lucius Malfoy's role in placing a Horcrux, being the enchanted diary of T.M. Riddle, confirmed soul fragment of the dark wizard known as Lord Voldemort, into the possession of a minor student with intent to cause harm. Fudge flinched at the name. Several Wisengamot members flinched. Harry noted this with the expression of someone filing it away. Third, the petition for independent ward status for Harry Potter, removing Ministry of Magic oversight provisions and replacing them with the governance of the Triad Bond itself, with Cyrus Greengrass as registered trustee. Fourth, and the one that had caused the gallery to be so full, the formal disclosure of the existence of additional Horcruxes and the request for Wisengamot-sanctioned authority for the Triad Bond members to pursue and destroy them, with full legal protection. Fudge had read the agenda 3 times. He still looked like a man trying to locate the exit in a room that had no exits. The first count went quickly. Cyrus presented the documentation, Gringotts records, Accord citations, the 3 years of ministry filings, and the Wisengamot voted 17-4 in favor of recognition. The 4 dissenting votes came from seats Hermione had already identified as Lucius Malfoy's political orbit. She made a note. The second count was where it started. Lucius Malfoy rose from his gallery seat with the composed inevitability of a man who had known this moment was coming, and had arranged himself accordingly. "Minister," he said in the pleasant, resonant voice of a man accustomed to rooms listening to him, "I wonder if I might address the session." "Lord Malfoy," Fudge said, with the relief of someone who has been thrown a rope. "The diary in question," Lucius said, addressing the Wisengamot with the air of someone making a reasonable clarification at a club meeting, "was an heirloom. An antique. I had no knowledge of any unusual properties it may have possessed. An heirloom, Cyrus said pleasantly. A family piece, Lucius confirmed. Old books accumulate in old families. One cannot be expected to, Ginny Weasley, Hermione said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand with theatrical intent. She just spoke into the slight pause after Lucius's sentence, and the chamber, which had been watching this with the attention of people watching an interesting chess game, shifted its attention to her. Ginny Weasley, Hermione said again, clearly, is 11 years old. She came to school in September not knowing that she was carrying a dark object with an active soul fragment inside it. By December she had lost months of memory. She had been used to open the Chamber of Secrets, to control a basilisk, to petrify 8 students and a cat. She was lying unconscious on the chamber floor when we found her, in the process of being consumed by the fragment. She paused. The diary was placed in her cauldron at Flourish and Blots on the 1st of September by Lucius Malfoy during a confrontation with her father, multiple witnesses present. The gallery had gone very quiet. This, Daphne said from beside Hermione, with the precise clarity of someone reading a verdict rather than making an argument, is documented. We have testimony from 3 second-year students who observed the interaction. We have the memory, preserved in a pensieve and available to this chamber, of the confrontation itself. And we have the confirmed account of Draco Malfoy. Lucius Malfoy went very still. Your son, Daphne said, looking directly at him for the first time, is not you. I want you to understand that clearly. She said it without heat and without mercy. He told us about the cup in the Lestrange vault. He confirmed the diary. He made a choice that cost him considerably, and he made it because it was right, and whatever you think of us, that reflects something in him that didn't come from you. The chamber was absolutely silent. Lucius Malfoy looked at Daphne Greengrass, who was 13 years old and standing on the floor of the Wizengamot in her school robes and looking back at him with gray eyes that hadn't moved an inch, and something happened in his face that Hermione watched with close attention. It was not the collapse of a man's composure. It was more specific than that. It was the expression of a man looking at something and recognizing, with the instincts of someone who has spent his life assessing power, that he has underestimated something in a way that cannot be corrected by further calculation. The evidence, Cyrus said into the silence, has been submitted to the full chamber in the registered packet. He set a hand on the top of a neat stack of documents. I would respectfully suggest that Lord Malfoy's response to the second count proceed on the basis of the actual evidence rather than a general characterization of old books. Several Wizengamot members made sounds. The sounds were not supportive of Lucius Malfoy. Fudge called for the vote. Lucius Malfoy sat down. The second count passed 21-2. The 2 votes were from the same Malfoy-adjacent seats that had dissented on the first count, which now told Hermione something important about which seats were votes, and which were simply furniture wearing purple. The third count produced the first actual argument. It came, unexpectedly, not from Lucius Malfoy but from an elderly Wizengamot member named Tiberius Ogden, who was by all accounts a reasonable man and was making a reasonable objection with genuine concern behind it. The Ward of Independent Status, Ogden said from his bench, with the measured cadence of someone who taught at length, is not a provision designed for children under 17. The Ministry oversight exists to protect me, Harry said. Ogden looked at him. The oversight exists to protect me, Harry said. That's what you were going to say. In essence, yes, Ogden said, not unkindly. Harry walked forward 3 steps, which put him at the center of the chamber floor. He was not a large 13-year-old. He wasn't imposing in the physical sense, the way some people could be. What he had instead was the quality the bond gave him, that absolute centering, the sense of a person who had found true north and was standing on it. With respect, Harry said, the Ministry's oversight of me has, to date, included placing me in a household where I was physically harmed on multiple occasions, monitoring my accidental magic for signs of rule violation while declining to monitor the household for signs of abuse, maintaining protective wards that protected the address rather than the person inside it. He paused. I don't say this to criticize every person in this room. I say it because the argument that ministry oversight is for my protection requires an examination of what the ministry has actually done with that responsibility. Ogden was quiet. We have identified, Harry continued, and this was the part they'd prepared most carefully, the part Hermione had drafted and redrafted and that Harry had then made entirely his own by simply speaking it the way he spoke everything, directly, without performance. 2 Horcruxes and destroyed them. We have located information leading to a third. We have a working theory of the remaining number, and their likely locations. We have done this as second years, on top of a full course load, with the assistance of Headmaster Dumbledore and the cooperation of Gringotts Bank. He looked up at the tiered gallery. The ward status isn't about what we want. It's about what makes the next phase of the hunt possible. If we're operating under ministry oversight, every action we take is subject to review and delay and... He paused. Leaks. A murmur moved through the chamber. Voldemort has allies in this building, Harry said. It dropped into the silence like a stone into water. I don't know who they are. I suspect some of you do. What I know is that if our movements are reported to ministry oversight before we act, the Horcruxes become harder to find and the people who hide them become harder to catch. He let that land. Then, ward status doesn't remove accountability. Mr. Greengrass remains trustee. Headmaster Dumbledore remains informed. We're not asking to be unsupervised. We're asking to be trusted with the work we've been doing for 3 years. Tiberius Ogden looked at Harry for a long time. Then he looked at Hermione, then Daphne, then back at Harry. You're 13 years old, he said. Yes, Harry said. And I was 8 when I figured out Dumbledore's plan required me to die for it. Age hasn't been the determining factor in any of this. The chamber was silent. Dumbledore, in his chair beside Cyrus, made no sound. His expression was the expression of a man sitting with something that was both true and painful, and choosing to sit with it rather than redirect it. The vote on the third count passed 19-5. It was the fourth count where Voldemort arrived. Not in person. Not in any form that had a presence in the room. But the count had barely been opened. Cyrus was 2 sentences into the formal petition for sanctioned Horcrux authority, when the chamber doors burst open with the specific dramatic violence of magic that didn't knock. 2 people came through the doors. The first was a ministry aura who had clearly been on duty and had clearly been hit with something that had ruined her afternoon. The second was Bellatrix Lestrange. She had been out of Azkaban for 6 days. The paperwork for her release, it had emerged earlier that week, had been filed 3 months ago, before the Gringotts inspection, before the cup was removed from her vault, by a legal team Hermione had traced to a firm with 4 clients, all of them former Death Eaters. The timing was not coincidental. Lucius had known this session was coming. He'd arranged a distraction. Bellatrix Lestrange was not the distraction. She was the point. She was tall and wild-haired and had the specific energy of someone who had spent 12 years in Azkaban learning to distill herself into something that didn't need the things Azkaban took away. Her eyes were dark and entirely present, and she moved through the chamber door with the fluid wrongness of very powerful magic wearing a person as a suit. "Where," she said to the chamber in general, "is the boy?" The Wizengamot chamber produced, collectively, the sound of 60 people trying to move in 6 different directions at once. Fudge made a sound that wasn't a word. Several Wizengamot members reached for wands. 2 ran for the emergency exit. Harry turned to face her. Hermione felt the bond do something. It did it without any of them deciding to do it. Simply rose, like water finding its level, all 3 of them aligned and present, and the ancient magic that had been building for 5 years waking up to the specificity of this moment. It was like the hallway at Privet Drive, but 5 years older and 5 years deeper, and it moved through her like weather. "I'm here," Harry said. Bellatrix looked at him. Something moved in her face, recognition, but the wrong kind, the kind that was looking for a memory that didn't match the present. She'd been expecting something smaller. Something more afraid. "The Dark Lord wants, Voldemort," Harry said, "is 7/8 dead. We destroyed the diary in the Chamber of Secrets. We removed the cup from your vault. We know where the ring is, and the locket, and we have a working theory on the rest." He paused. "He sent you here for what, exactly? To frighten me into what?" "He wants the location of the remaining Horcruxes," Bellatrix said, and she was smiling now, the smile of someone who found the conversation amusing in a way that was separate from anything a person without 12 years of Azkaban might find amusing. "You've been so helpful, finding them all in one place. He thought you might tell me. He thought a 13-year-old would tell you where the Horcruxes are," Hermione said with the tone of someone working through a logic problem. "In a room full of Aurors and Wisengamot members. He thought the 13-year-old might be frightened," Bellatrix said, eyes moving to Hermione. "Mud blood in a room full of people who don't actually want her here. Easy to." The magic moved before any of them consciously directed it. It came from all three of them simultaneously, and it came from the bond, and it came from something older than either of those things, and it wasn't a spell. It didn't have a shape or a color in the way spells had shapes and colors. It was simply a pushing back. A declaration of space. A statement, made in the language of very old magic, that these three people occupied this ground and the ground held them and nothing was going to move them from it. Bellatrix Lestrange took 3 steps backward. She'd been hit with magic before. She knew what it felt like. What hit her now was not what she expected, and Hermione could see the moment she registered that, the moment the smile went slightly uncertain. "I'm not afraid of you," Hermione said. Her voice was calm. She wasn't performing calm, she was calm, the way you're calm when you're standing on something solid. "Not because I'm brave. Because you're not the most important thing in this room." "What is?" Bellatrix said, and the smile had taken on a different quality. "The work," Hermione said simply. Daphne stepped forward beside Hermione. "We're going to finish it," she said. "With or without a sanctioned mandate from this chamber. With or without ministry cooperation. With or without Dumbledore's blessing, though we prefer to have it." She looked at Bellatrix with the grey eyes that had been trained since birth on the art of managing difficult rooms. "We're going to find every piece of your master that's left in the world and we're going to remove it. And then we're going to make sure the world that comes after is one he can't come back to." A pause precise as a blade. "You could leave now. It would be easier." Bellatrix Lestrange raised her wand. What happened next was not easy to describe to people who hadn't been in the room, which was why the accounts in the Prophet the next day were so spectacularly varied. What Hermione experienced, the bond pulling tight, white bright and enormous, the three of them a single intention, the ancient magic answering it, and then she was casting, they were all casting, not the same spell because they'd never been people who did anything identically, but the same direction, the same purpose, Hermione's Protego Maxima and Daphne's Vinculum. A binding charm so precisely executed it had the quality of inevitability, and Harry's Expelliarmus that took Bellatrix's wand out of her hand before the Cruciatus was halfway formed. The wand clattered across the chamber floor. The bond settled. Bellatrix Lestrange was standing without her wand in the middle of the Wisengamot chamber surrounded by the specific silence of 60 people who had just witnessed something and were collectively deciding what to file it under. "Oris," Daphne said to the room, in the tone of someone who has finished one item on an agenda and is moving to the next. "If you'd like to proceed." 3 Oris moved. Bellatrix went back into custody with the dazed expression of a woman whose afternoon had not gone according to its intended arc. The chamber doors closed. Fudge was gripping his chair with both hands. Neville, from his witness seat, let out a breath that he appeared to have been holding since the doors burst open. Dumbledore was on his feet, and his expression, stripped bare for a moment of everything measured and strategic, was something Hermione had never seen on his face before. Not pride, though it had pride in it. Something closer to the specific relief of a person who has been carrying a fear for a very long time and has just found it unnecessary. Harry lowered his wand. The bond was warm and wide and deep, 5 years of growing into itself, and Hermione stood in it, and felt Harry on one side and Daphne on the other, the 3 points of something that had chosen itself in a hallway at number 4, Privet Drive, and had been growing ever since, and she thought, there it is. That's what we are. Not just powerful. Not just bonded. Not just necessary, which was the word Cyrus had used when they were 8. Something more personal than necessary. Something chosen. Right, Fudge said in the voice of a man who has decided that the only way through this is forward. The 4th count. Shall we vote? Said Augusta Longbottom, from the gallery, with the finality of someone who has seen enough deliberation for one afternoon. The vote on the 4th count passed 23-1. The one dissenting vote came from a seat Hermione subsequently identified as belonging to a Wysendamot member with documented financial ties to 3 former Death Eaters. She noted it carefully. She always noted things carefully. The atrium of the ministry was busy at the end of a working day, wizards and witches moving in every direction with the purposeful distraction of people who have somewhere to be. The 3 of them came through on Dumbledore's heels and stood in the middle of it while he spoke briefly to a ministry official, and around them the atrium flowed. Several people looked. Several people stopped looking very quickly. A few didn't stop, and those few watched with expressions ranging from open awe to the specific blankness of people recalibrating their sense of what 13-year-olds were capable of. Harry didn't notice any of it, or noticed and decided it wasn't worth his attention, which amounted to the same thing. The ring, he said. Little Hangleton. We should go before the news cycle runs. We have time, Daphne said. Bellatrix knew about our progress, he said. She didn't get that from thin air. Someone told Voldemort where we were in the hunt. Which means someone in this building, Hermione said. Yes. I know. She was already thinking through the vote breakdown, the documented financial ties, the specific geography of dissenting voices. Give me a week on the ring. I want to go in prepared, not fast. Harry looked at her. The ring might be cursed, he said. Dumbledore mentioned it. Not directly, he said it carefully, the way he says things he doesn't want to say directly. But something about Gaunt's history, the Deathly Hallows, I know, Hermione said. I've been reading about the Hallows since April. The ring has a stone in it. She paused. The Resurrection Stone. They stood in the middle of the ministry atrium while workers flowed around them, and the weight of what she just said settled. He was going to put it on, Harry said. Not a question. Without knowing what was in the ring itself, Hermione said. Yes. The curse in the ring would have, the stone would have called to him, to Dumbledore, because of who he's lost, and the curse would have activated when he touched it. She looked at him carefully. We go in knowing what we're dealing with. We go in prepared to destroy the Horcrux without anyone touching the stone itself. Can it be done? Daphne said. I've been working on the theory for 2 months, Hermione said. Yes. Harry looked at her with the expression she knew best on his face, that particular, specific look that he'd had since they were 8 years old sitting at a kitchen table, the look that said he was seeing her clearly and was glad about what he saw. It had deepened over 5 years. It had become something with more weight and more warmth and more history in it than she had words for. 1 week, he said. Then we go. Daphne stepped up beside him and Hermione stepped up on his other side, and the 3 of them stood in the ministry atrium on a Tuesday evening in June, 13 years old with 4 Horcruxes still in the world and a partial resurrection and a war that wasn't over and 100 things still to do. None of it was done. Most of the hardest parts were still ahead. But the Wysendamot had voted. The bond had legal standing. Lucius Malfoy had been formally investigated. Bellatrix Lestrange was in custody. And somewhere in Little Hangleton there was a ring in a shack that they were going to find and destroy on Hermione's timeline, which was the best possible timeline, because Hermione's timelines were thorough. Cyrus appeared from the elevator bank with Neville beside him, Neville, who had sat through the whole session and then the whole confrontation with the wide-eyed but steady expression of someone who had decided he wasn't going to flinch today. He stopped beside Harry with his chin up. That, Neville said, was, I don't have a word for that. Significant, Daphne suggested. I was going to say frightening, Neville said. But also that. He looked at Harry. You knew exactly what to say to every person in that room. Not every person, Harry said. Most of them. Harry shrugged with one shoulder. I just said what was true. It's not usually that simple, Neville said. It is when you stop being afraid of the people you're saying it to, Harry said. He glanced up at the golden fountain at the center of the atrium, the fountain of magical brethren, all its gilded figures arranged in their careful hierarchy. He looked at it for a moment with a thoughtful expression. That's going to need to change eventually, he said. The fountain? Neville said. The thinking it represents, Harry said. He turned away from it. Come on. Dumbledore will want to debrief. Dumbledore's office that evening was different from how it had been in second year, when Dumbledore had debriefed them with the air of a man regaining control of a situation. Tonight he sat behind his desk and looked at the three of them with the expression he'd worn more frequently over the past year, the expression of someone who has stopped trying to be the architect of everything and is learning, slowly and not without difficulty, what it feels like to be part of something rather than above it. Fawkes was on his perch. The Phoenix looked at Harry with one bright eye and made a sound that was very soft and very warm, and Harry reached out without thinking and touched the bird's feathers, and the bond did something quiet and golden at its edges. The Wizengamot will ratify the mandate within the week, Dumbledore said. Fudge will sign it. He has no remaining political cover to refuse. The leak, Harry said. Someone told Voldemort our progress. I want to know who. I have suspicions, Dumbledore said. I have more than suspicions, Hermione said. She produced a folded piece of parchment and set it on the desk. Her vote analysis, the financial ties, the pattern of dissenting seats. This member's Gringotts holdings include a dormant account registered to an alias that appears in the records of the Azkaban release paperwork for Bellatrix Lestrange. It's circumstantial, but Dumbledore picked up the parchment and read it, and his eyebrows did the thing they occasionally did, which was rise and stay there. When did you prepare this? During the session, Hermione said. I multitask. Dumbledore looked at the parchment, then at her, then at the parchment again. He set it down. I'll bring it to Amelia Bones, he said. She's the one person in that building I trust to handle it without a leak of her own. Agreed, Harry said. Dumbledore folded his hands. He looked at the three of them, really looked, the way he had in the ministry, that unguarded moment. I want to say something, he said, and his voice was the voice he used when he was being honest rather than considered. I have spent 40 years believing that the shape of this fight was mine to determine. That the best protection I could offer the people I cared about was to manage things. Control information. Arrange outcomes. He paused. I was protecting people from making choices that might hurt them. I was also preventing them from making choices that might change everything. He looked at Harry specifically, and the grief in it was real and uncomplicated by this point. I'm sorry, Harry. Not for the first time, and not for the last, I imagine. But specifically tonight. For the version of this fight that required you to not know things. You deserve better from the start. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The bond was quiet and steady between all three of them. Hermione could feel Daphne's assessment of the moment, precise and watchful, and Harry's particular way of processing something offered genuinely. I know, Harry said. He didn't say it's fine because it wasn't, and they were both past the point of pretending otherwise. But we're here now. What's in front of us is what matters. Dumbledore nodded, once, and looked like a man putting something down. What's in front of us, Daphne said, is the ring in Little Hangleton. Then the locket. Then whatever Ravenclaw artifact remains and the snake. And then, she paused, and the pause was the shape of the last item on the list, the one they'd carried since they were 9 years old. Then the last piece. Harry's piece. The sliver of Voldemort's soul that had made its home in a scar on a baby's forehead and had been there ever since, dormant but present. The piece of the Horcrux list that none of them had approached directly because approaching it directly meant approaching what came after. The bond, Harry said. You've been thinking about it. He wasn't asking Hermione. He was asking both of them, looking straight ahead, because he'd known they'd been thinking about it, and he'd been waiting for them to be ready to say it. There may be a way, Hermione said, to extract the fragment without what the prophecy implies needs to happen. The magic of the bond is older than the Horcrux magic. If the bond can act in our interest without conscious direction, and if the fragment in me is what's keeping him from returning fully, Harry said, then we remove it, Daphne said. Cleanly. Without sacrifice. She said it with absolute conviction, and the specific tone she used for things she had decided were true and would arrange the world to accommodate. I've been reading soul magic theory since we were 10. There's a precedent in the 1300s, before Horcrux magic was outlawed. A reversal process. It requires. She stopped. It requires the exact magical conditions of a triad bond operating at full capacity. Harry was quiet. We're not there yet, Hermione said. Full capacity takes time. But every Horcrux we destroy brings us closer, because every piece of his soul we remove is one less anchor for the fragment in you. By the time we've found them all, we might be ready, Harry said. We will be ready, Daphne said. A silence, and in the silence the fireplace crackled and Fawkes shifted on his perch and Dumbledore sat very still with his hands folded. Then Harry said, "Okay. Just that. No drama. No performance." The same word he'd said in a kitchen in Greengrass House 5 years ago, when 2 girls he'd known for 6 hours had sat across a table from him, and told him they were going to fix the situation, and he'd decided, in the particular, quiet way of a person who has been waiting a very long time to decide something, to believe them. Hermione felt the bond expand slightly, warmly, the way it did when all 3 of them were thinking the same thing at the same time. Not the same thought, exactly. The same direction. Forward. They walked out of Hogwarts on the last morning of term 3 days later, the summer ahead of them and the ring in Little Hangleton and 4 Horcruxes after that, and then whatever came after the 4, and the morning was clear and early and the loch was very still and the castle behind them was making the sound castles make when the students leave, which was the sound of a very large old thing settling into its own quiet. Harry walked between them, hands in his pockets, looking at the path ahead. Neville was behind them with his trunk and his newly repotted Nimbulus Mimbletonia, which had grown considerably over the year in a way its owner found satisfying and most of his dormitory mates found alarming. He'd spent 2 weeks in May practicing the binding charm Daphne had used in the Wisengamot chamber, and he could execute it well enough now that she told him so, which from Daphne meant he could actually execute it exceptionally well. "Little Hangleton," Harry said. "You said a week." "I said a week and I have been thorough," Hermione said. "I know you have. I have diagrams." "Of course you do. And a containment theory for the stone that I'm reasonably confident about." "How reasonably?" 87%. Harry looked at her. "That's the most confident I've ever heard you about anything." "It's very good theory," she said. Daphne reviewed it. "Twice," Daphne confirmed. "It's very good theory." Harry looked ahead at the path and the loch and the summer. He looked like himself, not like the boy in the cupboard, not like the boy who'd learned to make himself small, not like the symbol everyone in the wizarding world carried around in place of a person. Like Harry. Like the person who'd decided, in a kitchen with cold tea and a shoebox and 2 girls he'd just met, that existing without permission was something he was going to try. "All right," he said. "Let's go find it." And the 3 of them walked down the path toward the gate with the bond running warm and old and enormous between them, the summer opening ahead, and the work still to do, and not one single step of it taken without each other.